The Dutch CCTLD operator, and who's been working with other people to progress this over time, following a desperate need. Now, if you listen to him and if you learn from him, maybe you will never have that desperate need, so then it's always difficult to measure what the value of success is. If you do get in that situation where you think, oh, we should have paid more attention and do something about it, it's on you. But let's see that we don't need to get there. With that, Thijs, can I invite you to introduce the measures as proposed in the cookbook?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the introduction. Can you see my screen? I believe so.
I don't hear your voice, I see your lips move, so... Is there a double
Can you
mute?
hear me now?
I can hear you now. Perfect.
I can hear myself in the echo. Thank you. Okay, then let me share my screen. Great. Well, thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Thijs van den Hout. I'm calling in from the Netherlands, and I will present a multi-stakeholder approach to DDoS protection. But first, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm a researcher at SIDN Labs. SIDN, as Maarten said, is the operator of the .nl top-level domain, and SIDN Labs is the research, the R&D branch of SIDN. I have a master's degree in artificial intelligence, and I'm a working group chair in the Dutch Anti-DDoS Coalition, which I'm mostly here to talk about. All right. The topic of my presentation is collaborative DDoS mitigation. And this rather busy slide shows how we in the Netherlands approach this topic. And it's also pretty much the agenda for this talk. We introduce the concept of anti-DDoS coalitions and how they work. I'll talk about what the organizations are that are involved in such a coalition. And I'll talk about the activities that organizations in the anti-DDoS coalition engage in. Like sharing knowledge in working group, like sharing the recent DDoS trends, also sharing data about the DDoS attacks that are actually targeted to the organizations through the DDoS clearinghouse, and collaborative exercises, so real-life, large-scale DDoS exercises that help build up resilience to DDoS in the members of the coalition. But first, what's the motivation for all this? What's the motivation of this multi-stakeholder approach or collaborative DDoS mitigation in the first place? DDoS attacks are not really a new phenomenon. They've been around for dozens of years. But in 2018, the attitude toward DDoS attacks in the Netherlands changed. We got more and higher impact DDoS attacks that actually took offline some critical service providers and critical internet infrastructure providers. And a big target at that time was the banking industry, but also governmental organizations like the Tax and Customs Administration. So these are some headlines from that time. I'm sorry, they're mostly in Dutch. At the same time, we saw that DDoS attacks are mostly repetitive. These attackers, they recycle the same attack profile to hit another target at a different time. So it would only make sense to exchange information between these critical organizations in order to get a better view of the DDoS landscape. So we're aiming for an ecosystem-wide view of the DDoS landscape instead of just the narrow view that one organization has from their vantage point. So a few of these critical infrastructure operators wrote a letter urging the community to work together on this. And out of that came the Dutch Anti-DDoS Coalition. And after 6 years, we still believe it's a very useful approach in tackling DDoS. And we think that it can also be beneficial for other communities, such as the Caribbean internet community. So I'm very happy to be able to present this topic here for this audience as well. Currently, the Anti-DDoS Coalition consists of 20 organizations, and are mostly operators of critical infrastructure in the Netherlands and critical service providers in the Netherlands. Examples are ISPs, internet exchange points. The banking industry is still represented, organizations from the government, but also law enforcement and a DDoS scrubbing service provider. So these organizations form the coalition and together work on tackling DDoS attacks. Now, how is such a coalition governed? What's the governance model? As I said, it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So we have a democratic model. We have what we call a coalition core team that currently consists of 4 people from different organizations in the coalition. And they deal with the daily governance and the bookkeeping and introducing new members, etc. Next to that, we have 5 working groups, each with an elected working group chair. And in these working groups, the substantive work is done. These working groups have changed a bit over the years, but currently we have legal affairs, which is also support for other working groups, like setting up data sharing agreements or indemnity agreements, but also for legal advice on how to deal with DDoS in the legal sphere. Communication working group deals with outside communication, but also the internal newsletter and organizing events. So far, we've hosted 2 events on collaborative DDoS mitigation with outside speakers. That was a lot of fun. The exercises working group, they perform large-scale DDoS exercises to practice resilience, as I briefly touched upon. I'll go into more detail about that later. Intelligence and attribution, which is a relatively new working group. I'll also talk about that later a bit more. And the DDoS clearinghouse working group, which is the working group that I chair. And it's concerned mainly with sharing the data that is extracted from DDoS attacks. So sharing data about DDoS attacks between organizations in the coalition. We organize 4 plenary meetings per year. And in these meetings, we discuss the progress of the working group and vote on issues like investments in networking equipment, for example, or admission of new members. And sometimes we invite an outside speaker to present a relevant topic. Organizations pay a yearly contribution fee and/or they contribute in kind to these working groups. Now, let's zoom a little bit out of the anti-DDoS coalition and look more broadly at the European Union. Because around the same time as the anti-DDoS coalition was taking shape, the European Commission had this big research and innovation program called Horizon 2020. And in that program, so SRDN and a few other companies from the anti-DDoS coalition, we contributed to this Concordia project. And this project, the Concordia project, right? The Concordia project is aimed to improve the European cybersecurity sector and set up a cybersecurity competence network. So in the Concordia project, there was also a work package scope for DDoS. And in the end, we ended up leading that task. So in Concordia, we worked on developing the DDoS clearinghouse. And on the next slide, I'll explain what that is. And this enabled a very nice symbiotic relationship between Concordia on one hand and the anti-DDoS coalition on the other hand, where we could develop this technical platform with EU funding and do so in close contact with the end user group, which is the anti-DDoS coalition. So we were very on top of the requirements from the start, and we could run pilots of the system very easily in the anti-DDoS coalition, which is very nice. So now, in Concordia, we developed the DDoS clearinghouse. The DDoS clearinghouse is a technical platform that allows organizations in an anti-DDoS coalition to share information about the DDoS attacks that they are actually hit with. They can share this with other organizations in the anti-DDoS coalition through this platform. And it works as follows. So whenever an organization in the anti-DDoS coalition is hit with a DDoS attack, they can capture a little bit of this network traffic, so a DDoS traffic capture. And with this sample of network traffic, they can use the dissector tool to generate a summary of this DDoS attack. And this summary contains the key characteristics of this attack, like the source IP addresses, the ports, the protocols that are used, the services that may be behind them, the amount of traffic, etc. So all the core characteristics of a DDoS attack. And this DDoS fingerprint is in a standardized format, and it can then be stored in DDoS-DB. And from there, it can be shared with other members of the anti-DDoS coalition. So when another organization in the coalition reads these DDoS fingerprints from the database, they can learn about all these different kinds of DDoS attacks that are happening in the coalition. And they might be able to come up with mitigation rules to be more prepared for when that DDoS attack may hit them. So again, this is in the light of broadening the view on the DDoS landscape to an ecosystem-wide view, so organizations are more prepared for the DDoS attacks that are out there. Beside the core components, so the dissector and the DDoS-DB, in Concordia, we also developed some supplementary components that can be used to expand the DDoS clearinghouse, like add more information about the IP addresses that are used in this attack, or visualize the DDoS. And all this is open source, and I'll get back to that a bit later. Now, one of the results of our work in Concordia is our final deliverable for the project, which is the DDoS Clearinghouse Cookbook. And the cookbook can be seen as a very comprehensive documentation, and not only of the technical aspects of the DDoS clearinghouse, but also the legal and organizational aspects that are required to make collaborative DDoS mitigation work. Because we learned that this is definitely not just a technical challenge, it's mostly an organizational challenge. This cookbook also contains the lessons learned from practice with the Anti-DDoS Coalition. And we've also included the template agreements that we use in the Anti-DDoS Coalition, like the data sharing agreements and indemnity agreements for the exercises. That's all in the appendix of the cookbook. And the aim of this cookbook, therefore, is just to make it as easy as possible for other communities of service providers on the internet to start up a similar project and also engage in collaborative DDoS mitigation, which is what we really believe in. Then later, we shortened this cookbook to a paper that we published in IEEE Communications magazine, which is a shorter read, but it's still packed full of information. And both are accessible via these links, which will also be shared later. Then lastly, I want to highlight the activities of two of the working groups in the Dutch Anti-DDoS Coalition. And the first is the Exercises Working Group. This group organizes yearly DDoS practice drills, sometimes twice a year, for participating organizations in the coalition. And this is often one of the biggest reasons for organizations to join the Anti-DDoS Coalition, is to actually practice with large-scale DDoS attacks. The exercises are in a red team, blue team setup, which is very common for cybersecurity exercises. So the red team comes up with DDoS attacks for the participating organizations, and that takes quite a lot of preparation and meetings. I think they start like half a year before the exercise. And they have bi-weekly meetings to plan down everything down to a minute. And these, the texts that they come up with are both volume-based and application-based. It's pretty much what the participating organization wants. And these attacks are very serious. We use heavy-duty networking equipment to send real DDoS attacks to these participating organizations, which of course can have a big impact on them. Things really break. So that's why we do these exercises on the weekend and at night, to have as little as impact as possible on the operations of the participants. And the legal working group here makes sure that everything we do is legal and that we have the indemnity agreements between the attacking and receiving organizations in place. Yeah, and on the right, there's some pictures. You can see a game board that we developed for this, which is also open source. And participants really learn a lot from these drills. The Dutch tax administration, they actually practiced with a DDoS attack that they later got hit with for real. And they were able to deal with it much more effectively than they would have otherwise. Another more recent working group is Intel and Attribution, where we collaborate closely with law enforcement. And here we gather information about the availability of DDoS attacks to the public in so-called booters online, where you can just pay to send a DDoS attack to any target that you want. And here we gather information about these DDoS booters and sometimes even purchase a DDoS attack and send them to ourselves so we can capture this DDoS and see what it actually entails. We can use the DDoS clearinghouse to extract the DDoS fingerprint and have a better idea, of a better understanding of the DDoS attacks that are out there in the wild. And then later we can use this DDoS fingerprint, for example, to attribute DDoS attacks that we see in the wild to specific booters. So yeah, attribution of DDoS attacks in the wild. And we can discover new attack types. This can be an inspiration for the exercises that I mentioned before. So in conclusion, I talked about collaborative DDoS mitigation and how we in the Netherlands have approached this topic with an anti-DDoS coalition. I talked about what such a coalition entails and their activities. the DDoS Clearinghouse as a technical platform to facilitate data sharing and some of the working group activities. And DDoS is everywhere, and it really is a problem that's here to stay. So we're better off working together on this topic. And our experiences with collaboration in the coalition are very positive. And I'm sure that it could also be beneficial for internet communities all over the world. Then lastly, all our contributions are open source and open access to make it as easy as possible for other communities to also form and cooperate on this topic. So here are all the links. For more information about the Anti-DDoS Coalition, you can visit that website or send us an email for any questions. Or if there's any questions now, I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thijs, for an excellent explanation. DDoS is there. And if you're a single company, it's very difficult to protect against it. If you're a small group of companies, it's a little bit easier. But if you really set up a system like a clearinghouse that helps with joint resources and the early sharing of information, it's almost like climate change. That reference was made before. If you detect the signs early, you can act faster and you can share the resources to deal with it. Any specific questions about it? And you know that this resource is available. DDoS Clearinghouse for the clearing stuff, and no more DDoS.org for other information. I have a question in the room, Thijs.
Yes.
It's Nigel Casimir. Not exactly my question, but I did notice Brian Cute raised his hand online.
Oh, great. Thank you. Brian, go ahead.
That was an error. I was just trying to start my video. Sorry, Thijs.
Oh, that's okay.
Who's first? I think I saw Nigel's hand before Brian's. So Nigel, please go ahead. And then.
No, I was just drawing attention to the fact that his hand was up, but he said it was an error.
Brilliant.
Okay.
So what was your question, Brian? Sorry about that.
No, I was trying to start my video, Martin. That was a mistake on my part. No question.
Thank you very much. I think Brian is next, and his presentation will make clear why he is so enthusiastic about this. Because it's not the same, but it's similar. It's how to prepare best for the bad and prevent it to happen. So Thijs, thank you very much. Can you stay a little bit?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
I'll stick around.
Excellent
Thank
presentation. Hi. Brian works for the Global Cyber Alliance. And in fact, we go back a long time because we used to work for PAR together, side by side. So it's a real pleasure to see you here. And please share about the mission of Global Cyber Alliance and what you can offer to specifically this region, right? A lot of small businesses, small islands, etc. Brian, floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin, and good to see everyone here today. My name is Brian Cute. I'm the COO, Chief Operating Officer, and the Director of the Capacity and Resilience Program at Global Cyber Alliance. Global Cyber Alliance is a global nonprofit. Our mission is to build communities to deploy cybersecurity tools, services, and programs to provide cybersecurity at global scale. As a nonprofit, we focus on tools and solutions, cybersecurity resources that underserved communities need. And today, what I really want to share and talk about with you is community and the importance of community in building capacity, not just for digital skills, but particularly for cybersecurity. And community is a word that we're all very familiar with, that we embrace. But I want to share with you how it is that we deliver basic cybersecurity capacity building to underserved communities to demonstrate how critical it is to work together, numbers of organizations, numbers of stakeholders it takes to get these resources into the hands of those who need it the most. With that being said, what we have done since 2015 is curated toolkits and solutions that are designed to help defined end user communities. We have specific cybersecurity toolkits for small businesses that are globally accessible and globally applicable. We have a toolkit for mission-based organizations or nonprofits. We also have toolkits for elections officials, given the critical role they play in democracy and elections processes. We have one for journalists, given the role they play in free and open societies. And we also have one for the individual internet user. What makes these resources, I think, a little bit different, and this is really where those who are underserved, who have these needs to protect themselves, struggle. Number one, understanding the risks that they're up against. What are the things that cyber criminals are doing to attack you, to hack you, to get your data, to get your money? Understanding the risks on the one hand, and then knowing what steps to take to mitigate those risks. So what the approach we've taken is there are thousands of free tools out on the internet, and many of them are very, very good. But the individual user finding the right tool, understanding their risks can be a challenge. So what we've done is we've curated and created a toolkit framework that follows the basic cyber hygiene principles. And there's these simple steps, usually 6 or a couple more depending on the end user community. And if the first step in the journey is what's on your network? Do you even know what devices are attached to your network? Who's got access to your network? That's always the first stop on the journey of becoming basic cyber hygiene secure. So what we've done is we've created a framework that takes the user, and we're talking small businesses, we're talking, NGOs, and lead them through a basic journey that helps them identify each risk in turn and help them understand that, and then point them to a free tool that they can implement, download into their machines, begin to protect themselves. And we feel very strongly about serving the underserved, right? There are many paid for cybersecurity tools. There are big companies have the resources to have an IT department and buy the types of tools they need to protect their company. But when we're talking about small businesses everywhere, NGOs, et cetera, these are folks who really need this type of resource. So that's what we're dedicated to doing, and that's what we deliver. But what's most important is how do we get it in the hands of the end user? And that's what I want to focus on today. What we typically do to get these tools into the hands of these end users and help them build their basic cyber hygiene capacity is we work with a number of different organizations. This takes, in the case of the Caribbean or any place where we would do this, it takes organizations who are on the ground, who already have a wide connection with the end user community in question. So whether it's small businesses or NGOs across the islands, organizations who are already delivering digital skills building, capacity building to these end users. And we need to find those organizations. We need to partner with them. We can bring the very useful basic cyber hygiene tools and solutions to the work that they do, but we can't do it ourselves. We don't have the reach. We need those organizations. We need funders. We need funding organizations, whether it's a government program, whether it's a corporation who has a corporate social responsibility program that wants to build capacity, whether it's a philanthropy. We need funding organizations, right? We need the standards bodies, as we all do, right? I mean, our toolkits are based on the Center for Internet Security's controls, based on the NIST framework. And those types of standards evolve, as we know. So they're a critical player in this as well. We need organizations who can communicate these programs when they're available, when we've created the community that can deliver this type of capacity building, which is so essential. We need it to be visible. We need the small businesses in the islands and in the region to know this program's available to you, and here's when it's happening, and here's how you can connect. So in realistic terms, it really does take a community of organizations to provide this type of critical capacity building so that small businesses, NGOs can protect themselves against the attacks that take place, against the financial loss, against the disruption to the delivery of philanthropic activities. It's a community. And what we find in our, since 2015, we've been very fortunate to connect with some organizations that do large scale capacity building. For example, we're working with the Asia Foundation right now on a program that's building basic cyber hygiene capacity across 11 countries in Asia. And it gets more challenging, though. As you get into certain geographies, you need to have, if you don't have those large umbrella organizations, you need to find local organizations who are working with the community already. And how do we find each other? How do we connect? And this is really the challenge. This is a challenge for all of us because it does take a community to deliver this. I'll give you one more example of the gap that we're trying to address. We recently attended a regional meeting in Latin America of many of the Latin American governments. And one of the things that came up as a consistent talking point was, some of these governments that don't have the biggest budgets when it comes to cybersecurity, they noted again and again, we really need threat intelligence, right? If we're going to build effective defenses, we need threat intelligence, but we can't afford, it's $500,000 or more to get the commercial grade threat intelligence that we could use as a government to understand the threats against us, against our citizens, and how can we begin to build defenses? Well, because of what we do, we happen to know there are over 300 free threat intelligence services available on the internet. So what we did because of who we are is we went about curating over 300 free threat intelligence services that are available today. And we also, knowing that you don't want to just provide a threat intelligence service to an organization and say, here you go, do what you need to do. There's specific important things about threat intel, right? You don't want to have the mistake of false positives and take down the wrong website. You need guidance on how to use this effectively to create defenses. So we created that guidance, and we created basically a free package of threat intelligence services that we're now making available to smaller governments who don't have the budget. These are the gaps that we're trying to close. But what I really want to share with you is it takes a community of organizations in each instance to get these valuable resources into the hands of those who really need them. And the biggest challenge is us finding each other, connecting, coming together, putting our respective strengths together so that we can deliver capacity building, we can help raise awareness, meet the end user where they are. Very importantly, those who don't have a high level of digital skills already, how do we package these services up, these tools up in a way that meet them where they are, raise their awareness on a risk, and help them take action to begin protecting themselves? But to me, the central challenge is doing this through community and finding each other so that we can broaden the impact of these resources.
Thank you so much. Very clear. I see some nodding and applauding faces in the room. Any questions from the floor? Because again, here there may be opportunities for tools that are available, just available only but they need to be introduced to the right places in your societies. Whether you're a service provider or whether you're a government or whether you're a civil or society organization, these tools may be of interest to your target groups. So Dieter Williams asks how to get to you, please. maybe best is to type in the chat, Brian, the website of the Global Cyber Alliance.org, of course.
There we are. Along with my email as well. Thank you for the question.
So, good. Thank you so much, Brian, for this. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the work you've done. And are you able to stay around for later as well for the action planning, or?
Absolutely. Yes.
Many people are very busy multitasking nowadays. But this was just one of the examples of the tools that's out there that you can really use in your region to step up, particularly when you're an organization that's interested in progressing that. And this is really the collection of people we got together here in the Caribbean IGF. So with that, a very specific subject that I discussed with the organizing team from the CTU as well is for this region is undersea cables. Dependencies on there, and one of the things that we also confronted with is extreme weather and how that impact the infrastructure. So what to do to make sure that not only nowadays in common traffic, but also in disaster situations or post-disaster situations, you can quickly get back up to communications and make things move. The undersea cable is a very important element from that. I was very happy to see Mr. Dan York from Internet Society focusing on some of the happenings that were mainly triggered by African situation, but lessons from that are learned throughout. And after that, we'll have Ms. Nicole Starozelski from Berkeley, who's been studying this for a while, and then we'll also be able to go in specifically to the Caribbean situation. So with that, Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. Thank you, Martin, for inviting me, and thank you for being here. Always great to follow Brian, too. Good to see you, Brian, and to see what the GCA is doing and all of that. So Martin asked me to talk a bit about what we've been noticing and looking at with the subsea cable situation. And I am going to talk a little bit of story about Africa, but sort of bringing it back to where it connects here and what we're looking at. So I mentioned earlier, if you were here for the earlier block, around our Pulse website that we have, and this is part of where this comes into, is what was looking at. If you missed the earlier session, if you just go to pulse.internetsociety.org, you'll see a variety of different information we have there around network resilience, around shutdowns, around other pieces. And you also see a blog. This is maintained by a collection of over 30 different data partners that are here. But I want to talk about a specific instance of what happened. Back a few months back here in March, we were just there, and all of a sudden we started to get alerts on March 14th that were saying, wait, there's connectivity issues. If you're not aware of the website, of the IOTA website, it's a fantastic site for being able to track information. We were watching what was happening there, and a number of countries all across Western Africa and also South Africa were showing significant drops in traffic. Another one, Cloudflare Radar, is another excellent resource that also was showing us this drop that was going on. Interestingly, you can also see there were drops over on the eastern side of Africa that were happening simultaneously as well in all of this. When you start diving into the traffic, we could see that in some of the areas, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Togo, Benin, as some examples, we could watch these drops that happened very significantly in what was going on. Soon thereafter, you started to see messages out on social media from some of the ISPs and providers in that area that were saying, there's damage to undersea cables that are going on. Microsoft published a warning about their Azure system and how people were not able to get to it or were having reduced connectivity. And they got more specific, saying there's multiple fiber cables on the west coast of Africa that have been impacted, which could reduce the capacity that was going on inside there. So this was going on during the scope of the day we started documenting it, and this is, Martin, where you sort of found my connection, the piece around that. We started documenting what was going on. And I'll put the link in the chat later, but we were, tracking what was happening, what was going on. The end result really was that it turned out to be that 3+ cables, 4 really ultimately, were all being affected. They were all being cut in some way. Later, investigation found that it was some kind of undersea rock slide. 3 of the cables, at least, were going through the same physical kind of location where the rock slide came and knocked out the cables in some form. Now, interestingly, South Africa was an interesting case because let me come back. A day or so later, you could see that they were still having significant outages. What you're seeing in these charts, the dashed line on the top is the normal traffic pattern, and the solid line on the bottom is what was not happening. Some areas were affected a little bit less than others. And in particular, if you looked at South Africa, there was a drop for a little bit, but pretty soon it came right back up. This kind of goes back to my earlier presentation. We were talking about the Internet Resilience Index. If you look at the South Africa and the resilience scores and the things that we have there, there's a much higher density of infrastructure, of connectivity, of different kinds of routes. Now, all of this was going on. There were repair ships sent into the region. Things were happening. It took, in some cases, a couple of months for some of the cables to be repaired. In fact, one of them was repaired around May 10th. But what's interesting was just a couple of days later after that and there was a whole report that we put, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes in the webinar chat here. But we dive into more detail about exactly what happened and what lessons can be learned in pieces like that. And I'd recommend it to people in a region such as yours that is highly dependent on subsea cables in some form. But as I was saying, a few days after the last one was sort of repaired on May 13th, there was an outage of 2 cables over on the eastern side of Africa. This was kind of the more traditional thing that happens where a ship dragged an anchor across a couple of cables and wound up cutting them, severing them that were there. But what was interesting was the internet had reductions in capacity, but it more or less stayed on. And again, we wrote up a whole report. I will put these both in there. They're useful resources to go and look at. But a lot of what happened there and why you saw so much resilience on the east side of Africa versus the western side is a number of factors. One is that there's been a lot of growth in cables. This is a picture from Steve Song. If you know Steve Song, his Many Possibilities site. This is what the cables looked like in 2010 going around Africa. There weren't a whole lot of them. If you look at his picture now in 2024, there's a lot of capacity. There's a lot of different, multiple paths, multiple things. A lot of stuff was going on. What you might see over in the left side of that picture is that there's a lot kind of going on in the under where the Western Africa goes out and curves in there. A lot of that goes into Cote d'Ivoire and some of the areas there which had this outage that caused so much problem. And it's interesting to think about. One of the questions that I ask people is, do you physically know where the cables go? Because it's very possible that there are people in that region who thought they had diversity, thought they had resilience because they had 3 or 4 cables coming in, not realizing that in several cases, they were all going in the same kind of physical area that could be damaged by the same kind of rock slide. But on the western side, there's more cables being built, more capacity. Another element that we're seeing in Africa that made this a little different too is that there's been a lot of build of intra-Canada, intra-African routes. There's been a lot of capacity being built across the ground, which is increasing the mesh, making it stronger, making it bigger in different kinds of ways. We're also, if you look at the resilience of the internet exchange points, these are those physical points where people come together and do interconnection between the network of networks. There's also a factor that internet exchange points are not just, physical places where you plug things into switches. They are that. But very often they also build a community around them. And so you have people who will assist very quickly in going and looking at how do you reroute routes? How do you reroute, connectivity across different places? As we are speaking right now, over in Kinshasa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there is another event happening, the African Peering and Interconnection Forum, or AFPIF. And one of my colleagues is actually presenting around some of these situations there right now and looking at how this growth of IXPs has helped in creating more resilient networking across the area. And if you look at this chart that's on the left, which is built off of data from the Pulse IXP tracker, you can see some things like South Africa has 10 IXPs, and almost 54% of all of the local networks in the area are interconnected at one of the IXPs. So if there's drops in connectivity in some areas, there are other paths that can be found, particularly through the IXP and the partners that are related there. In contrast, if you look at, say, Tanzania, where there's only about 29%, or Uganda, where there's only 14% of local networks being interconnected, there's less resilience, less capacity in some kind of form around that. Another factor is local content. And this helps. If you have data centers, if you have places with caching for content distribution networks, you have the ability that people can get to data even if the transit, even if the backhaul, even if the larger connectivity is not always there. And again, if you look at this chart and you see that for South Africa in particular, 86% of the top 1,000 websites, that's the data that's being shown here, is how many of the top 1,000 websites that are accessed in that country are available on servers in that country, or cached content that are there. And in South Africa, it was 86%, again, of those sites had some kind of caching, local content caching within there, or local, or being deployed there. Similarly, Kenya, 60% or so. So when they were having the effects of these subsea cable cuts, they were finding that in many cases, people were still getting to the content because it had cached copies, because the information was there in some form, in some way. So those are both major factors: having additional paths, multiple paths, having local content caching in some force, using internet exchange points to build up more of a fabric that's there. Other factors, as you can see here, competition certainly is part of it, multiple paths. We are seeing, the rise of low Earth orbit satellite systems that bring high bandwidth and low latency, although they do not have the capacity to replace a subsea cable in terms of the actual capacity that's going on there. But they do give us that high speed, low latency connectivity that certainly can provide options for connectivity and at least a temporary or those kind of situations there. We're seeing, the understanding of actual physical geography, as we say here, hardening of cables. The cable industry has certainly looked at how do we harden these a bit more. Another major factor that you have to look into is the resilience of electrical and power systems, right? We saw this just recently with one of the hurricanes that came into the Caribbean region and hit Jamaica pretty hard and hit the power infrastructure, which then, of course, hits the internet infrastructure. Those two are increasingly, linked as we look at how do we make things more resilient in different kinds of ways. Also, an important element in any kind of resilience, subsea cables, et cetera, is the strong local technical communities. That is the human resilience that enables us to go and figure out how to rapidly reroute when a cable is knocked out or something like that. I know I'm going to be followed by a presentation specifically around the Caribbean. I would just point out, if you look at telegeography, and I saw somebody, Rodney Taylor, had dropped in the chat their submarine cable map. If you have not spent time with that, if you've never looked at that, it's a wonderful thing. I could get lost for hours just roaming around, looking at the different cable systems in there. And it shows on there the cables that are available in the Caribbean region. You can go in there, click on a cable, click on a landing station, see what's there, learn more about each of the cables. And this is all important stuff to be able to understand what's out there. As I mentioned, the Internet Resilience Index is one tool we offer to help people be able to go and learn more about the resilience in their particular area. Let me just wrap up before we go on for the conversation. We're increasingly, Martin, you mentioned it, climate change, climate-affected issues is certainly an area, and we see it with subsea cables in particular, And there's been a number of different research papers and documents around this that we're seeing, not only the typical rising sea levels, but more extreme storms, more extreme weather, more intense weather, erosion, different aspects that are causing things. We're interestingly also seeing new shipping routes because, for instance, with some of the ice melting, we're seeing ships going in places they haven't before, which suddenly brings more kind of concerns for some of the subsea cables running in those regions. So all of these are reasons we have to be thinking around resilience. I would encourage people to take a look at those resources that we've mentioned. To do that, if you're interested in Pulse and the pieces that are there, you can send this email, subscribe, look at our information and the pieces that are out there. And I'm going to wrap it there because I want to hear from our next presenter talking all about subsea cables in the Caribbean. But I'll be sticking around for questions, and I'll certainly be here for a little bit later as well.
Thank you very much for that, Dan. Really appreciate it. But before going into questions and discussions, indeed, Nicole, you heard this for a first time, but you haven't heard about sea cables for a first time. It'd be great if you share from your experience and see how we can merge this together into a useful discussion. I mean, it's clear it's not only about the sea cables, it's also about the infrastructure around it, like the internet exchange points and making sure that within the country you can do it. My experience with sea cables, I worked for European Commission Research Program for Communications in 95 to 2000, and we talked about how to protect them against shark attacks at that time. So, yeah, I'm out of date. Please, Nicole.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very excited to be presenting today alongside Dan and so many other fascinating presentations. So I'm just going to speak briefly, as I want to leave time for discussion and questions, about a project that I'm working on called Enhancing the Strategic Resilience of Subsea Cables in the Caribbean. So I'm working with the Suboptic Foundation, which is the charitable arm of the Suboptic Association, which is the global organization that's dedicated to the development of subsea fiber optic cables. And in 2023, we were funded by the Internet Society Foundation to develop a study, a map, and a plan to enhance the resilience of subsea telecom cables in the Caribbean. Now, I just want to speak briefly about the significance of subsea cables in the Caribbean. This is one of the things that we know and are documenting as part of our report. So thanks, Dan. We'll have some continuity from your slide to my slide with the telegeography map of subsea cables. So for anyone that doesn't know, these carry over 99% of international data traffic. And despite the increase in LEO satellites, satellites do currently not match the cable's speed, security, and cost. And so currently these cables are absolutely essential to a resilient internet and in turn to economic stability and future investment. And we've been hearing this from people across the islands. One of the things that motivated us was that to date, there has been no holistic evaluation of the resilience of this system in the Caribbean, which considers the technology in its entirety alongside social, environmental, and political factors. So our project has been to evaluate and then find avenues to enhance subsea cable resilience. And the framework that we're using is the framework of strategic resilience. So we looked at a lot of the things that Dan had pointed out and existing forms of resilience that are considered for subsea cables. So for example, there are bodies who are responsible for and have developed best practices for marine route planning for maintenance. So the International Cable Protection Committee has thought about how to enhance the resilience of individual systems in their marine route. In terms of the cable landing station, hardening equipment and the front haul, this is usually the purview of individual companies that have an economic incentive to ensure business continuity. And then there's resilience of the cable landing point, including the diversity of cable landing points on individual islands, does receive some consideration in the design process, but is less well covered. And then, of course, I think probably more familiar to this audience is resilience of the network as a whole, which has advanced due to mesh networking and work of operators to try to ensure multiple routes. However, there's something that's missing here, which is strategic resilience. And this is the identification and enhancement of features that will make an entire network within a region more resilient. Who is responsible for this? Who can achieve this? So some of the features of strategic resilience include it's geographically specific. So that means that what will enhance resilience off the coast of, West Africa is not the same thing that will enhance resilience in the Caribbean. It also involves considering commercial affordances and constraints. Typically, a lot of studies of resilience focus on technology, but resilience is also hindered and enabled by market conditions. And the scope of resilience typically extends beyond a single network or a single cable, and thus you have to work with multiple operators, which is also difficult. So strategic resilience, by focusing on the features that would enhance resilience of the region's network as a whole, in this case, the Caribbean, reveal challenges that can't be remedied by changes to design, equipment, engineering, or building specifications. So what does strategic resilience mean in the Caribbean specifically? So to do this, we're about halfway through a quantitative and a qualitative study. So our quantitative study is based on an array of different data from public sources, but also from operators. And our qualitative study aggregates information from people with years of experience building subsea cable networks in the Caribbean, who are responsible for maintaining and operating these systems, regulation, and a variety of sectors across the islands. And we've been asking them, what are the major vulnerabilities? Where can resilience be enhanced and how? So all of our interviewees have argued that the primary need in the Caribbean is an increase in the number of cables. And this is very different from, for example, Southeast Asia, where there's, different kinds of needs. And there are two problems. So one is that the cables in the region are getting old. Many were built in the late 90s or early 2000s, getting towards the end of their life. So this is not a problem simply of increasing resilience. It's actually a problem of maintaining existing levels of resilience. And the second problem is that in order to participate in expanding digital economies and ensure continuity during catastrophic events, islands require even more resilient networks than they currently do. And so again, this is coming from interviews with folks who have been involved in the construction, maintenance, and regulation of these networks for decades. So if we're thinking about strategic resilience specifically in the Caribbean means additional cables, like the biggest threat is that there are not enough cables currently. And we're seeing that the biggest obstacle to this, in addition to, there are issues of information and politics and so on, is one of cost, right? So our interviewees have noted over and over that, there's not always, but usually a direct correlation between increasing resilience and increasing cost. And there's a cost across all parts of the network, but generally the subsea cables in the Caribbean have been well engineered and constructed under tight specifications. But we do not see a market case, a business case for private investors to invest in a resilient network in the same way that some other parts of the world have been able to channel private investment towards building a resilient network. We also see some technical challenges. So submarine technology is not able, you can't deploy it at a small scale. So you can't just deploy a small subsea cable. It's always going to be a technology that's at scale. And one of the things that we've also heard repeated is that an obstacle to achieving strategic resilience is also the circulation of information. So this means that on islands, people are not often aware of what's happening in the industry. And similarly, in the subsea cable industry, people are not often aware of what are the conditions on the ground on a given island that they're trying to connect. So that's part of what our strategic resilience plan is focused on. So just in brief, we're identifying challenges such as shared risk scenarios, obstacles to financing, and political challenges to development. But we're primarily focused on paths forward. So in line with all of the discussion about action, we're really interested in best practices for incentives for attracting and facilitating cable development, potential practices in financing and funding, scenarios for collaboration, including the identification of the kind of nuanced timelines that cables often operate within, and then how to navigate relationships with the large players in the subsea industry, thinking in complex ways about considerations of hubbing as well. In terrestrial networks today, as my co-principal investigator has observed, is resilience is typically this zero-sum game. So providers are all business competitors. Everyone tries to maximize their own resilience and revenue by not sharing their infrastructure with others. By considering shared risk scenarios, we're hoping to transition this to a positive sum game, working with providers to think how can they be incentivized by governments in the region to build physically diverse cables, give faster permits, such that everybody benefits. So I'm not going to take up much more time. I just want to say, we really need you. I would love to hear from any of you about your needs, thoughts, and opinions in this area. Please reach out to me and let me know what you're thinking. We're in the midst of conducting lots of interviews with lots of people. And then the last thing, for all of the youth that are out there, we have an advisory team, paid positions for youth who will join our team for the next 6 months to do work to promote the development of a resilient subsea cable network. So I will stop there, and I really look forward to any questions, comments, and hopefully conversations that will result from this.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Impressive and good to see the link to Internet Society as well.
Yes.
A shared background. From my side, indeed, there was a question in the room by Rodney Taylor. How have investments by global tech giants like Google and Meta into subsea fiber systems to support their global cloud data center footprints impacted the overall resilience of the internet? If I may add, does it matter who owns them, and how is that dealt with? I think you partly went into it, Nicole, in your last part where you said sharing is caring. But please.
Yes, I would say that we have seen a lot of investment by the global tech companies in subsea cables, especially Google. And we've seen also a lot of interesting new routes being developed, right, as part of their, own resiliency plan. Unfortunately, thus far, the Caribbean has been left behind. And we have not heard, they have not set up new routes across the Caribbean. Now, that is one possible avenue, right? But that's a choice, for Google to do that development. And we don't know if that's going to happen. Does it matter who owns it? I think it matters to some people and not to others. So I think that's a tricky question, because I think for some people it is very important to have ownership in your cables, right? And to invest, for governments to invest in their cables. And we've heard from a lot of people that it's actually very important, this investment by the government, and the ownership by the government. And then for others, it seems like that matters less, that they would, be fine with a global tech company laying cables to their country and supplying internet connectivity.
Yes, thank you. In the end, it's all investments decisions as well, right? So then you raised your hand. You were going to get the word anyway, but as you raised your hand, now you get it double.
Well, I would just say, I think the answer to Rodney's question is...
And you can even unmute yourself. We're willing to listen to what you say.
I am unmuted. Can you hear me now? Okay, I was unmuted. So I think the answer to Rodney's question is that, it is making the investment by all of these firms into their own subsea cables and the things is certainly going and creating overall resilience of networking, certainly in all of that. The question is, and you get into sort of the nuances of, well, if this is, Google connecting their data centers in different places and parts, is that truly helping the overall internet, or is it creating private networks that are between these different environments that are, that is, Google's cable in some kind of way or something like that? And so I don't know. I guess I would say partly is the answer is that I think the more cables we have, the better in some form. The question is, will they route the traffic for the global public internet, or will they be, separate private networks that are interconnecting private assets and private networks and pieces like that? I think that's sort of that question, as to whether they are actually helping the overall resilience of the global public internet that we all use.
A good question. I see Nicole thinking as well. While you're thinking, it's also a matter of infrastructure ownership and how you deal with that, right? We see that also in when we went away from the monopolies in telecoms, when we went away from the monopolies in rail. Who owns the infrastructure? How do you regulate that? The poles and pipes. So, yeah.
Well, and to your point, the investment, right? If the global tech companies are the ones who can invest and can bring about the cable infrastructure that helps us make a more interconnected network of networks and a more, resilient internet, then, great on one level. But let's make sure that it's being available for that global public internet in some way. That's really the point. We don't need separate networks that are private and all of that. We truly do need some ability to access that and route in those ways.
Yeah, partly the story that we had from DDoS mitigation as well. How do you set up joint resources that you can all count on?
Yeah, the commons problem kind of thing.
It is. I love to see things come together. Question in the room, Sharon, please.
Yes, Sharon Onosepa with the CTU. So one of the other challenges that we are seeing in the Caribbean, and looking more in the direction of Nicole, is a monopoly on the subsea cable systems. We may have different, let's say, subsea cables entering in a given country, but when you look at it, I mean, it's the same owner. I'm not going to mention any particular country right now, but there is one country in the Caribbean where they have 7 subsea cables entering that country. But the owner of all these subsea cables, that's the same consortium. So it doesn't help us much, because still, if you would like to reduce the internet cost locally, then it's a monopoly on the subsea cable area. So that's also one of the challenges that we are facing, and I think it would be good if Nicole, within her research, could focus also a bit on this challenge that we are facing.
Who wants to pick this?
I mean, I would just say that thank you for that. That's an excellent point and an excellent challenge, and we will foreground that. I think right now what we're looking for is, where does the solution to that challenge exist? Who can advance, whose responsibility, and where are the pathways and avenues for breaking that up in a way that would produce lower internet costs or, greater diversification of ownership. If that's a challenge that exists today, which we're actually hearing that across our interviews as well.
I would just add in, Sharon, first, great to see you here, and I would add on that if you have 7 cables coming into one island, but they're all owned by the same consortium, then yes, that's not a competitive environment. And that certainly is something that needs to be pointed out in some way. And I'm actually wrote myself a note because I know we have a market concentration component on our Pulse site, but I don't know if we get into this aspect. So I'm gonna flag it to some of our folks back here to think about as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I see a thumbs up in the room in case you missed that. One other remark is there any way this could be included in the over-the-top negotiations? I'm aware it is, but I can't say much more than that. Do you have more in-depth insights in that? And then we got the last question in the room.
No.
No, I see shaking heads. Good question. It is part of it. Also, like in the old days, telecoms infrastructure is still seen as a service delivery in itself, on which services are delivered, and then the big over-the-top providers seek to have a guaranteed access. So it's certainly part of the talks. With that, Tarek, two more questions, and then we really need to move on. But please, Tarek.
Thanks. So good afternoon, everyone. My question is really for Nicole. So in your presentation, I saw that what we need is more cables, and the problem that we have is the cost. You also mentioned that you've had some success with getting investments from private sector. And I guess this kind of also links to Shunan's point on the monopoly. But what strategies have you all taken to really encourage private sector investments, and how could we leverage that in the Caribbean to further strengthen our resilience? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so based on some successful cases in private sector investments that we've been tracking, both in terms of looking at big tech, but also other private sector investors and projects. One thing that they have noted is that the way that cables operate and the cable planning and installation process operate is that it moves at once very slowly, but also needs a lot of sort of security in the process. And so having a sense of what kind of permits are required, what is the process going to be like on island, having that very clear, having policies in place, that really facilitates private sector investment because they don't want to go in when there's uncertainty as to whether or not they'll get a license, uncertainty as well whether or not the landing will work. So having that's something that can be done for a relatively low cost, but can really increase the level of investment.
Thank you very much for that. I see then not last question in the room on underwater sea cables.
Can you say if the International Cable Protection Committee is a part of your proposed solution?
Yes, the International Cable Protection Committee has a set of best practices that cover already a lot of these policies. And so they've outlined some ideas that governments could take to facilitate the ease of implementation of new projects and the ease of investment in new projects. So we're building on their recommendations, which have already been sort of outlined on a technical level and a marine level. And we're extending it to the terrestrial environment, but also to the commercial environment. And I'd be happy to send those along to you as well or circulate them.
So they are targeting the Caribbean regions?
Yes, yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. A key subject for the region, and I think there's some inspiration for action here for sure.
Thank you for having us.
So with that, next is Sherlyn. You're going to talk about the DNS Observatory. Or should we ask the next speaker first? Or please.
Yes, I do have a presentation. Please, the DNS Observatory. So I will start with that one, and after, yes, please give me the first page. Yes. Yes, okay. And after this, my friend, I will show the link, okay? Okay. So let me start with this. Shernon Osepa, I'm a consultant with Caribbean Telecommunication Union, and I will be focusing on how we are planning to tackle the DNS abuse in the Caribbean. And that is why we came with a DNS observatory that we are working on. So it's very important for us to, because a lot of times we are just start the conversation, especially with groups, and we don't make any definitions. We assume people understand what we are talking about. So I personally, I would like always to give a few definitions so that we start on equal footing. So when we talk about DNS abuse, it depends at which definition you look at, because we have a few definitions from ICANN, Registrar, GTLD's Registry Stakeholder Group, and we also have a definition from the so-called Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. So again, depends which definition you use, but normally DNS abuse is composed of 5 or 6 broad categories of harmful activities insofar as they interact with the DNS. So this is basically what we do understand with the definition of the DNS abuse. And we have seen yesterday, today, we have talked a lot about all the abuses that we have seen taking place with respect to the DNS. So malware, botnets, phishing, farming, spam, fast flux hosting, etc., etc. So these are more on the technical side. So let me go back because my friend wanted to take a picture. Okay, yes. And when we look at the website content abuses, then we can see, for example, child abuse, violent, extremist content, hate speech, intellectual property related, and so on and so on. So this is basically how we can categorize the abuses that we are seeing. So if we take a look at the Caribbean, looking at some, what I would call some newspaper headlines, we have seen, we can observe a lot of cybercrime activities going on in this part of the world. So these are just what we have observed in headlines, newspaper headlines. For example, Caribbean faced 144 million cyber attempts in just 6 months. So that was, let's say, last year. 144 million cyber attempts in 6 months. This doesn't mean that all of them were successful, or most of them were not successful, but it gives us an indication how interesting, if you can use that word, our region is. People are trying to get something from us in this part of the world. And we have seen also that Trinidad and Tobago State Telecoms Company was hit by cyber attack. This has a long story, so I'm not going to focus on it because it's a bit sensitive. So I'm not going to focus on it, but we are aware regarding what happened. And my good friend Nancy Quiroz, she's from Costa Rica, and we have seen that also Costa Rica did declare state of emergency a couple of months back, given that they were attacked. So Costa Rica was just shut down for a couple of weeks based on cyber attacks. We are here in Guyana, so I assume that Guyana is immune, right? These things don't happen in Guyana. So I have some news for you. And later on, I will give you my source where I did get this information. But I don't want to tell it right now because I don't want everybody to start looking at other countries. So let's focus on this. So we have seen from 100% cyber attacks that can happen in a given country, and I'm talking about the last 7 days. I just made this picture this morning, early morning, when I woke up around 4 o'clock, Rodney. That's very important for you to know. So he's my boss, so he should know that. So we have seen that 68.8% cyber attempts were, let me say, conducted over the e-government unit. And we do have what we call the autonomous system number there. That's AS264694. Again, that doesn't mean that they were successful, but at least we have seen that 68.8% of attempts were conducted on the government's unit. 17.8% on the local telecoms operator, Guyana Telephone and Telegraph Company. Again, that doesn't mean that they were successful, but we have seen the attempts. 9.6% on a company called eNetworks Incorporation, 3.3% on U-Mobile Cellular, and 0.3% on Cloudflare Net. So this is the reality. So there is something happening in our region. Our region, sometimes we do underestimate what is happening here, but we are very interesting region for, let me call it the cyber criminals. They are using our region as a kind of a test bed. They come here, they explore all their systems, and once they are successful, and then they go elsewhere and to be even much more successful. And we should not underestimate all these folks. We're talking about people who are very, very knowledgeable. A lot of them have PhDs in computer science. I don't have a PhD in computer science, but a lot of them do have master in computer science, and a few of them, let's say, bachelor. So when you have someone who has the skills and he or she doesn't have a job, they will use the skills that they have to earn a living. And this is exactly what they're doing. So we need to protect ourselves. So what can we do about it? If you look at cyber crime, cybersecurity, it's not something that only one particular stakeholder can address. So we need to work governments, law enforcement, business community, all of us, academia, civil society, and so on and so on. So Caribbean Telecommunication Union, the Caribbean Telecommunication Union, CTU, what we have been doing is to focus on a more holistic approach. We would like to focus on the policy side. So we are aware that we need to have policy inside, policy in place. Basically, all these national cybersecurity strategies, that's something that we need to work on. Most of the Caribbean countries, we don't have national cybersecurity strategies in place, so that's something that we need to work on. And of course, we need to have people with the knowledge. That's why we're working on capacity building. As SG Rodney Taylor did mention this morning, we have just become member of the GFCE, which is also part of that strategy to work on capacity building. And of course, collaboration, and at the end, also enforcement. Because if you have all these legislation in place and you don't have a way how to enforce it, still we have a big problem. So that is why we have been focusing on a so-called Caribbean DNS Observatory. So we would like to get a better sense what is happening. We have seen several colleagues already did explain the threats that we are seeing, but we would like to have a better sense and data that we can discuss with policymakers and other key decision makers. We will be looking on two key, let me call it, sources, government portals. Especially with COVID, we have noticed that governments have started to use the internet more and more because they didn't have another alternative. If they wanted to communicate with the community, especially during COVID, everybody was locked down. So the government portal was very, very, very important. And this is also that also the cyber criminals, they also know this. They also know that, okay, governments have started to use their portals even more and more. So if we can focus to ensure that that thing doesn't work, we will be happy as well. And also it's very important, what we call the country codes top level domain names. This is the digital identity on your digital identity on the internet. So the stakeholders that we will be working with to execute this project is what we call the ICANN's LAC-RALOS. In this particular case, Trinidad and Tobago, the ISOC chapter, Trinidad and Tobago, and also St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And there is an additional computer science or computer ICT organization in Trinidad that is also more or less involved with this. And the coordination will be done by CTU. So this project has been divided into two phases. In the first phase, we will be looking at what I have there in green. So the goals, we already did define the goals, what we would like to do, the key areas that we're going to focus on, the data sources that we're going to use, and then selection of tools. We will be also giving some, let's say, analyze the data that we have collected. And in a further, let's say, in the second phase, we would like also to make a more deep dive with some, nowadays everybody's talking about AI, artificial intelligence, so we're looking ways how we can make it a much more interactive system of collecting data in order for us to see what is happening in the Caribbean in a much better way. So very, very high level, that's what we're doing, and expect within the 2 weeks, because that's the deadline that we have, that we will present, let's say, what I would call the work, and then we will give some people the opportunity to look at it, give us some feedback, and then we will be presenting the final work. So that's basically what the DNS Observatory is all about. So my friend, before I go to can you please share with me the link that I gave you a while ago? Yes?
Drums drumming.
Yes, it's coming. Yes, okay. So with Martin, I didn't mention it, but CTU has 21 or 20 member states, and what we will be doing is to look at all the portals of the member states, because as I did mention, the government portals, that's very, very important. So we would like to measure the health of all these governments portals. And we do have a few figures that we did. So we are talking about 20 or 21, and we already do have a few figures. For example, we have heard Nicolas Antoniello speaking about IPv6 this morning. And what we have seen so far, 41.96% of these portals, they they don't, or they do use, they are IPv6 enabled. When you look at the internet, there are two key components that we need to take into consideration. We have heard and we have seen a lot of presentations, but we can summarize them in two big areas. We can look at the domain names, and here is where we have the DNSSEC and also the kindness initiative that Albert Daniel has been talking about. And on the other hand, you have also the internet routes. So where you have the RPKI and also manners that we have been speaking about. Okay, can you go back? Yes? Yes, yeah, okay, let me start here. So we see that 2.3% of our domain names are DNSSEC enabled. What does this mean? This doesn't give you any assurance that when you go to that particular website, not email, website, that indeed you're reaching that particular website. So if I would say, for example, I would like to go to rodney.tt, if that website is DNSSEC enabled, then I can be assured that I'm reaching rodney.tt. But if it is not DNSSEC enabled, it could be something else. And as I did say, the cyber criminals, they know this. They know, and we can see it here. 2.3% of our websites are not DNSSEC enabled, and we need to work on this. Secure connection, 11.6%. We have route authorization using RPKI that we have been talking about, manners, for example. That whole manners things relies on RPKI. 53.5%. So half of our internet route traffic, it's not secure. So this is something that we need to work on it. Can you just continue? Hello? He's looking outside. Yes, next. So these are, for example, the data that we will be collecting in collaboration with Internet NL for us to provide a more holistic view of the health of the internet, and especially the government portals that are important to us. So very high level again, this is what we are doing. Expect within 2 weeks, we will be presenting the preliminary report, and then based on that, we will be making a deep dive to finish it, and then you guys can get the final work. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So as I understand, this will become part of the DNS Observatory. Excellent, yes. So with that, I mean, again, a specific observatory to the region itself will really help to focus on things. And I'm sure CTU and Shannon are very open to suggestions of how to extend it, how to improve it, and use it. With that, it's almost a natural introduction to the next speakers. The last subject for now to talk about is about CCTLD good practices. I still remember at the invitation, first time Rodney ever talked to me, invited me for talking with the ministers in the region about the role of CCs versus GTLDs. And indeed, the conclusion of that was that it's great to have your own CCTLD that can serve your people, that can serve that, and often in a non-profit way. The excellence of the work of the service is something that competes with that of the generic TLDs like .com, .org, etc. You need to be able to rely upon it. A standard is set. Good practice is across both good standards of what to keep up to is only observed for generic TLDs by ICANN's compliance according to the policies that are set there. These policies don't go for CCTLDs. They have their own way forward. Nevertheless, most of them care, no surprise. And I'm very happy to introduce first to you Ms. Krupa Shah, who will tell a little bit about her experience, the experience of Identity Digital with CCTLDs and how they help them to be resilient. And after that, Mr. Patrick Hussain from Trinidad and Tobago, running the CCTLD for Trinidad and Tobago, explaining what the specific experience and practice is there. So with that, Krupa, floor is yours. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Martin. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You're all in different parts of the world, I believe. So my name is Krupa, and I lead the registry services team at Identity Digital. I have a little presentation to share here, which I'll go through a few slides, and then I'll leave the floor open for any questions. If there are questions that I'm not able to answer, I'll take them down, but I'll make sure that they do get answered for you. So with that, I believe you can see my screen. And so I'm just going to keep going. So a little bit about Identity Digital. We are a global registry operator for over 270 TLDs, and we are the leading expert on providing world-class registry services to a number of CCTLDs, including TLDs in the Caribbean, such as .bz, .ag, .bm, .lc, .vc, and many more. I'll start here by thanking the CTU for the opportunity to talk to you all about the role of an RSP or registry services provider in supporting the continued operation of CCTLDs in a safe, secure, stable manner. And considering that we've talked so much about resilience, resilience is going to be an important aspect of my conversation here with you. Moving on, a little bit about, again, we'll talk about what a registry services provider does, and then I'll go over some best practices. So what does it mean to provide registry services or to be a registry services provider? And where does that fit in ensuring the resiliency for a CCTLD? There are many aspects of providing these services to a TLD or CCTLDs in general, including operating the TLD in a safe, secure, reliable manner, using modern infrastructure and a cloud-based platform. That is something that we do. We also implement protections for the TLD, including a robust abuse management program. We just heard our previous speaker speak about the rise of cybercrime within the Caribbean, and implementing a robust abuse management program is an important part of protecting the TLD. We also provide DNSSEC as well as DDoS protection. The internet never sleeps, as you all know, and therefore having 24/7 support for our CCTLD operators as well as their registrars is a part of a registry services provider service offering. Ensuring continuity of the DNS and the registry in the event of global events, in the event of global events such as a Category 5 hurricane, floods, or COVID, which impacted all of us. All of this is critical in ensuring continued operation of the TLD in a resilient manner. A registry services provider like ours also makes investments to focus on innovation and continuous upgrades for all of the TLDs in our care, whether that is enabling registry lock for added protection of the domains or providing enhanced business intelligence for the TLD. Implementing strategic measures to enable a successful revenue stream for a CCTLDs, including providing access to an established registrar channel, all with the approval, of course, of the CCTLD operator, is a critical aspect of ensuring growth for the CCTLD. All of this, in turn, results in long-term success for the CCTLD, and these measures put together result in a in an operation of the TLD in a trusted manner, in a resilient manner that enables growth while driving or while giving the operator complete control over the data reporting insight of their TLD, of their data, of their infrastructure. Now, why is this important? Why is all of the stuff that I said, why is it important? Why should it matter? Cybercrime is on the rise. We just heard a previous speaker attest to that. DDoS attacks are not slowing down. And we've seen last year that attacks are now persistent until they take businesses offline. So attackers are not just sending a massive number of attacks. They're not attacking infrastructures just merely by the number of attacks. They've gotten very creative, and they will persist until businesses do not go offline. So a well-protected global DNS infrastructure is critical to the mitigation of DDoS attacks, apart from the other benefits, which is continuity and stability for the TLD in general. A globally massively provisioned infrastructure is critical to ensure continuity, so that there is no single point of failure within the infrastructure in itself. Should one node go down, another one will take over. It is seamless to the end user. The internet continues to function on that space without interruption. We've also seen that domain name abuse, spam, phishing, other attacks are on the rise. The Caribbean alone, as you just heard, faced 144 million attacks in 6 months last year. We just heard that. There were countries that were specifically affected, Trinidad, Costa Rica, and many others. According to the Cybercrime Information Center, there was a 77% increase in unique domains reported for phishing in the past quarter. Now, the percentage of unreported domains could be even higher. And so a robust abuse management program is important to keep bad actors out of your CCTLDs. It has an impact to the reputation and the trust that your customers place on your namespace. Quick response and mitigation for DNS abuse is an important factor to enhance that trust and reputation. So registry services providers such as Identity Digital do that. And our abuse management program has shown decrease in reported phishing by about 50% in 6 months last year. As pioneers of DNS abuse management, we've also implemented those strategies to mitigate abuse for CCTLDs in our care, including proactively detecting abuse and then acting on it quickly, reporting it to the registrar, and making sure that the registrar has sufficient time to either act on it or we mitigate the abuse on our own. All of this is done, again, with the with collaboration with these TLD operator. Many of these factors have an impact on sustainable growth for the TLD. So all of these security, stability, abuse management issues, all of that eventually has an impact to the sustained growth of the TLD. And in addition, the distribution channel is important. Given the number of TLDs that are out there, hundreds of CCTLDs, thousands of GTLDs, shelf space in the registrar channel is an increasing challenge. So how do you get a registrar to carry and grow your CCTLD? If you partner with an RSP, then such as ours, then we're connected to registrars that account for 90%, over 90% of all domains in the market. You'll see here that one CCTLD continues to see growth in the channel distribution, about 700% or so since they transitioned to our platform back in 2005. And there are many such examples. Given the restriction of time, I won't go into them right now. And I'll close this out for now so that we can leave some room for our next presenter as well as some questions. I'll leave my contact info on the screen here so that you can reach out should you need to after this meeting is done as well. With that, thank you again to the CTU. And Martin, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Krupa, and good to see how the knowledge is spread and you use your service at your best ability to also fight abuse. Patrick, as a CCTLD operator, what is your experience? What did you do? How did you address this?
Okay, so I'll talk about TTNIC, the .TT registry. Let me just bring up my slides here. Okay, so the focus here is on resiliency, and I'll talk about how we've been able to operate the .TT CCTLD for over 30 years without any major issues. And you know, of course, Trinidad is a small island. We have issues with connectivity, you know, during hurricanes, etc. So we maintain our resiliency by using external resources in addition to internal resources. So some of the infrastructure we use, Anycast, etc., is external. But what I want to bring here is the fact that each island can manage everything themselves in terms of the registry services. You know, I know Kropa talked about their services, which is another good option. We've decided to do it ourselves, and we've been doing it for 30 plus years, as I said. So let me just briefly go over some background. So yeah, TTNIC has been around for about over 30 years. We are self-sufficient, and we do quite a bit for local organizations, schools, etc. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. We are guided by policies developed by Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. And Tracy Hackshaw actually talked about TTMAG, I believe, yesterday. All of our technical operations are managed locally. But as I said, we use some infrastructure externally. Now, our process was developed specifically for Trinidad and Tobago for our specific needs. And so essentially, it's necessary and sufficient, right? We provide everything that we need, but no more. So here are some things that, you know, I plan to talk about. Kropa already addressed, you know, or mentioned all the issues faced by registries, DNS abuse, etc. And we have mechanisms to handle that, but I won't get into those details. But I'll talk about why we've decided to manage .TT locally in-house. Why do we use our own in-house platform developed years ago, back in the early 90s? Why do we not support registrars? And how do we support local organizations? So in terms of local management, the history of this, the administrative and technical control was passed to us in the early 90s. And in those days, we did have, at the university, we did have technical expertise to do things in-house, so we decided to do it in-house. But because initially domains were offered freely, we had to do things efficiently. So we automated the process. We developed software to automate almost everything to reduce the effort required. The process we came up with and the associated software worked well. So even after we started introducing fees, we continued to use it, and we fine-tuned it over the years. Now, you know, small islands do not have large, well, you know, significant funds to spend on these initiatives. But in our case, all that is required is one part-time person for technical, basically me, and we have one part-time person who does administration and billing associated functions. As I mentioned before, we are guided by policies developed by local stakeholders, TTMAG. The platform itself, it was, you know, the code was written back in the early 90s, and it has been adjusted over the years, but it is robust. we've had to make adjustments based on different attempts at hacking, etc. But I'll knock on wood here. We have been successful in keeping safe. I know Shannon mentioned telecom company in Trinidad that was attacked last year. That wasn't us, just to make it clear. The platform was designed and developed for our specific needs, so the entire process is unique. Now, when we did this back in the early 90s, there was no open source registry available, no services as what Kropa mentioned. And since then, we have evaluated software options, but we've decided to stick with our own because it works well. It does what we want. We have great flexibility in terms of pricing, offers, etc. We've had positive feedback from registrants as well, and we provide almost 24/7, 365 support. And of course, we have the typical things like discounts, etc. Now, why no direct register support? Well, as a CCTLD, we believe domain names should not provide, we should not assign names that could do harm to our country. So we always would like to inspect domain names before they become active. And this is to avoid embarrassment. We don't want, somebody registering some politician's name is an idiot.tt and having it out there. So this requires inspection of the domain name before approval. And of course, there are AI tools that could do some of this, but we still want to be cautious. And this is the only manual aspect of our process. But still things, a domain could be approved and active within minutes. We do support local organizations, as I mentioned before. We provide free domains and hosting for schools, from early childcare all the way up to tertiary. We support the MAG. We help with we fund TTIGF. We support research through lab.tt, kind of ad hoc research group that does work in research in AI, communications, etc. We provide support and funding for organizations like the Computer Society in Trinidad and Tobago, IEEE, etc., scholarships, conference attendance for tertiary students, etc. TT Mag formed to provide policies for .tt, includes representatives from multiple stakeholders. It organizes and runs the annual TTIGF. And in addition, TTNIC helps fund some of their costs, like attending conferences, etc. TT Lab is also funded by us. It's an ad hoc research group containing, includes undergrad and postgrad students, scholars, diaspora. Members are from multiple disciplines, so it's a multi-discipline group. So it's not only data science. We have people from economics, statistics, you name it, mechanical engineering, physics. The focus is on publications of solving real-world problems. And right now we have, it's not 25 plus anymore. It's on the order of like 40 plus individuals. This is sort of what we do in terms of TT Lab. Some of this research is done for TTNIC as well, but not as much as I would like. So in concluding, we would like to assist other islands with formation of MAGs, multi-stakeholder advisory groups, and following the success of ours, we've been, our TT MAG has been in existence for about 7 years now, I believe. But it had to be kind of bootstrapped because initially, we had to choose members, and then those members would nominate and vote for new board members. And we were also willing to assist other islands with any issues they may have with registration processes and price optimization, which is one area I'm always interested in. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for really representing a great community effort that works and that is serving the Trinidad and Tobago people well with the TT domain. For my understanding, how much domains under management are there about, indicative?
Under .tt, it's on the order of about 3,500.
3,500.
Yeah.
Thanks. So really community-driven effort that works very well. I appreciate the example, also the way you work with the multi-stakeholder advisory group. I know more are looking for inspiration on how to do that, because that allows you to do it together. Just out of curiosity, while I'm opening the floor for questions in the room, there's such a lot of developments. How do you keep up with a relatively small operation to developments like quantum technologies that may require encryption? How do you feel about DNSSEC, RPKI, and these kind of protections? And have you integrated them?
Yes, we do support DNSSEC, etc. I mean, RPKI is outside our scope, but you know, my area of expertise is in communications, PhD in electrical engineering and computer science. So I do keep up on actually, I recently had a student who is now doing her PhD in quantum computing in Canada. So we do keep up, but of course, yeah, it's a wide range of issues to keep track of: cybersecurity, AI, DNS, etc. But we've been, you know, we've been successful in terms of getting students up to the level of international in terms of research to publish in these areas.
Okay, thank you. And I got one question from the room from Rodney Taylor. Is there any systematic collaboration with other CCTLDs from the Caribbean, like similar to LEC TLD? Is there sharing of lessons learned, etc.?
We would love to share. We haven't really. We've done some things on a one-on-one basis. So, for instance, with Bahamas, they have been using our software, and we've had talks with Barbados and some other islands. But yeah, there's no coordinated effort to really share what we've done, especially with the MAG. It would be nice to assist other countries in forming MAGs so that they could, you know, have their internal policies.
Yes, thank you. We got a question from the room. Sherman, please.
Yes, I have a question for Patrick. In one way or the other, Patrick, we have been struggling in the Caribbean for so long time regarding the number of, let's say, local domain names, in my view. So what can be done for us to move to the next level where we will start seeing much more people using our local domains? So what can be done in that regard?
Yeah, well, yeah, as you know, and we've talked about this before, it's a problem we've had for many years. Locals said to prefer using .com. We do have incentives for locals to use .tt, for instance, in our costing pricing framework. Locals pay half as much as foreigners for a domain. So there's an incentive for them to register local. and we have been, advertising, etc. But it is, as you well know, that at least in Trinidad, people tend to, or organizations tend to go for .com first, and sometimes they then go to .tt as well.
Thank you for that. One more question in the room, Albert.
Thank you very much, Martin. Albert Daniels, ICANN. I just wanted to add a comment on the issue of sharing of best practice and information across Caribbean CCTLDs that Secretary General Rodney Taylor asked. Many years ago, back in 2007 at ICANN 29 in San Juan, Puerto Rico, another CCTLD manager, another Dr. Patrick, but this time Dr. Patrick Lay, who used to manage .ag for Antigua, but who's now managing .lc for St. Lucia, facilitated a meeting of Caribbean CCTLDs at that ICANN meeting, and the intent was exactly that, to establish the relationships amongst CCTLD managers in the Caribbean so that there could be this sharing of information. Later on, at a CTU event in collaboration with ICANN in the Bahamas, I think Nigel would remember this, there was another meeting of Caribbean CCTLD managers, and we left with the same intent, that the CCTLD managers would connect, exchange, and then continue to collaborate and exchange information. So it seems we are at another inflection point where we need to encourage all of our CCTLD managers in the Caribbean to move towards that kind of situation. I remember Jacqueline Morris in Trinidad and Tobago, who's part of TTMAG, did try to establish a sort of Caribbean organization similar to LACTLD for Latin America and the Caribbean, again, to bring our Caribbean CCTLD managers together. So it seems like we need some encouragement, we need some will, we need some action, and I think we'll be talking about action a little bit later on today.
Yeah, a simple thing like a WhatsApp group with all the Caribbean CCTLD managers would be great.
Yes, thanks. And I understand that the mission of your country TLD is not to erase the region, but to really set an excellent example in your own country and serve the country. Knowing Krupa Identity Digital has a slightly wider scope, and it's great to see the different examples. What are your thoughts? What could you do to help in the region, PT and others, to share experiences? Well, how do you see that?
Thank you, Martin. So I think that there are a couple of factors here that we should do a deep dive on, not as part of this conversation here, but perhaps offline or in a separate session. But I think that there's a couple of factors that influence growth for the TLD in itself, right? One is the reputation of the TLD. But then as an operator or as an operator who has a partner, you want to make sure that there is a dedicated strategy for growth, right? That it's not all about just lowering the price and therefore you have growth. It's not about that. You need a sustainable strategy for growth. The channel is an important aspect. The registrar channel, that is an important aspect. I don't know all the rules about why a specific country only has, say, one registrar and hasn't opened it up to multiple registrars. I'm not sure about the rules surrounding that. I'm sure there are policies in place. But the channel is an important aspect that facilitates growth for the CCTLD. Understanding of the market is also critical for the growth of the CCTLD. Usage of the TLD in itself and how do you influence that is also an important character for growth. And it's not only about registering the domain, it's about using the domain. It's about having your email on that domain. It's about having your website on that domain, the website for your business, the website for your, even a personal website. That's what results in that sustained growth for that CCTLD. So I think there's a larger strategy that needs to be built because it's not as simple as execute this one step and that will result in growth or that will result in usage. And I'm happy to chat with folks outside of this meeting as well to help flesh it out, because I'm sure that every CCTLDs, while they face similar challenges, their challenges are also unique. Thank you, Martin.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for both excellent presentations that give a good impression of how you can go about. What I see with the TT example is a very deep funding in the local community and working with the local community. What I know from Identity Digital is the global experience and access to global knowledge because of skill. You can invest more in depth in that. And the combination is of course very strong. So knowing that there's a lot of TLDs in the region, CCTLDs, who are seeking the way forward, how can we be future-proof? How can we be there when success hits us? .ai was much smaller 10 years ago, example. How can you scale up? How can you do that? And also, how can you keep that connection with the community? So really appreciate both presentations. And with that, I'd like to thank the speakers and go for a short break here, like 15 minutes. And after that, I'd love to engage you into, so what did we pick up? What would you really want to commit to do and take forward here in the region? So thank you very much. See you back in 15 minutes. That's 10 minutes to the hour we start. basically this session. And also that report will be drafted for your feedback before we finalize it. And we try to make it useful. We won't change the world in one day, but we can do a step in the right direction together, basically. So with the action planning, one of the first suggestions was actually coming from the DNS observatory that CTU is already set up, that's already measuring things in the region, and that DNS observatory that helps to be aware of the situation, maybe further extended by the measurements of, so where are we with internet standards, modern internet standards? Do the measurements keep a view on that? And if you measure that regularly, and if people become aware of that and take that into account, that may lead to step up change, improvement, which is an important part of the resilience. Thank you, Sherman, for that one. Other things that came up were the community-based practices like manners and kindness. And as such, drawing attention to that may make sense in the region too. How do you do that? Examples all over the world are very different. But for instance, in Brazil, following the III workshop in Bolivia, we didn't build it, or III didn't build it, but it seemed to be inspired by that. In Brazil, there's the Safer Internet Action Plan, where they really go throughout the country with a kind of roadshow, where people get technical training to implement the right standards, the right procedures, and there's also awareness-raising events. So what you could think of is a kind of, dare I say, island hopping with some real knowledge workshop that you manage, and where you bring in experience, and where you try to get in the room different people at different levels. I can see for governments, it may be good to get a kind of insight, not only in, so where are our weaknesses, how can we make sure that we don't become a victim by strengthening our infrastructure. But the second element, and we didn't really talk about it, but could also be how can we stay on top of that and prepare for emerging technologies like quantum technology. How do you stay on top of that if you have the bandwidth of 3,500 domains, maybe 100,000 domains even? So I saw some nodding on the roadshow, so I just jot it down and we can always take it off again. For awareness, technical training, and yeah, how do you call it? A policy hackathon or something, or more? What would be a good way of putting it? Policy training, policy hackathon, awareness, policy awareness. Government, towards government. Development. So I can see, because you have a kind of, the CTU is in a position where they do go around, and that may be something where you can add on this kind of action. And please keep, oh yeah, Nigel, somebody online?
Yes, somebody online. Just to say that the roadshow idea is one that we have pursued in the past. I would say to good effect, maybe not, well, in fact, it's been a broad initiative. So you're going to roadshow and you address to a particular country and you address different communities within there, technical community, general, public, governments, and so on. So the program had, I'll say, aspects targeted to different communities, youth even, people in underserved areas, you know, all those sorts of things we've done in the past. So it's I think it's a valid option. Online, from Deirdre Williams, she is asking, what about electricity? Where did that go? Oh, yeah. Yeah, AI needs lots. Quantum needs more. Where will it come from for us? So, and Dan, supported by Dan York, actually, he agrees that electricity is definitely a key point. So, I mean, we hear about AI and even things like cryptocurrency, all these sorts of things that consume oodles of electricity. So the point is noted.
I've got to keep up to speed with emerging technologies, basically. So what's the impact? What do you need to prepare for? And the other point was, Claire, please, there's a mic. For the online speakers, please use the microphone.
I'm not sure what you have there. Keep up to speed with emerging technology, but I think the specific point of power is what is being made.
Yeah.
Keeping up to speed would mean, would typically
how
mean
to prepare for
understanding it and so on. But certainly the powering of these things is... Yeah, energy needs or something of this sort.
Yeah, the energy requirements.
Right.
In terms of, I suppose, environment and the cost. I think a lot of countries here have aging infrastructure. So what do we do?
Environmental impact of anything we do and moving forward.
Or sustainability, yeah.
So there's the environmental impact of solutions to be considered.
I suppose you could put in brackets sustainability.
Sorry?
Sustainability in brackets. Sustainability, yeah.
Sustainabilism.
Sustainability. Sustainability. Sustain, right? Ability. There you go.
Another element is how can systems be kept up and running in extreme weather conditions. War isn't the big problem here. In other regions I can see that's comparable. There's resilience and extreme weather, yeah? And the sea cable gave already some indications in that discussion about that, and there's no doubt more. Albert, you're holding the microphone. Why is that?
Yes, because I wanted to contribute. Thank you. I wanted to go back to the point of the roadshows, and just to support what Nigel has said, that the idea of a roadshow has been effectively implemented in the past. I remember being on a bus in Belize and driving for 4 hours to get to the underserved community of Punta Gorda and speaking to students and so on, and delivering a message of capacity building and opportunity and so on. And I think that was fantastic. ICANN also has what we refer to as a lack Eye Roadshow. And it's done in Latin America, but it's also done in specific Caribbean territories. And the way that we choose which Caribbean territory we go to is the result of looking at engagement metrics of the entire Caribbean, seeing who is participating and who is not, and then making a decision to go to a territory where we are seeing low participation. So what I'd like to suggest is perhaps maybe the time is right to look at how we've been doing the roadshows that exist and perhaps rejig them, redesign them to get the kind of outcome that we're looking for. We've seen, for example, our last roadshow in the Caribbean was in St. Vincent, and coming out of that roadshow, we actually got the first Universal Acceptance Ambassador for the Caribbean from St. Vincent. We got new applications for the ICANN Fellowship Program, and we now saw some tangible benefits coming directly out of the roadshow immediately after. So maybe if we look at how we're doing the roadshow, what the new objectives could be, then we can also attach some attention to the international standards adoption.
Yes, thanks. What I wrote down also, what I picked up between your words were collaboration. Collaboration with locations where people come together, like government-organized conferences, universities, maybe other places, and also collaboration with the knowledge partners. I mean, we had some of those on the call, on the Zoom calls today, like the Global Cyber Alliance, like ICANN, like Nick, Aaron, organizations like that are willing to come. And I think Brian was the one who said, we have the tools, but we don't have the access. So you need to help with the access, and then we can give you the tools or bring them.
OT in the utility sector, operation technology.
Operation technology?
That's in the utility sector.
Yeah.
Martin, I don't see my hand as well.
I'm sorry,
The OT, operation technologies, which focuses more on the utility sector.
Okay, not OTT, not over the top, but operational technology.
Yeah.
So to improve that, or to...
Yeah, like looking at the ways to combat it, especially for cybersecurity risk.
So good practice in technology level and the technology trainings that... Yes, I think that would be part sort of a kind of roadshow type approach.
Yeah.
You see that happening in Brazil, where they go to the different, well, Brazil is bigger than the Caribbean, but they have different regions. So they really take it out to different regions, bring people there together for technical training, hackathons, whatever.
Yeah, maybe we could look at that here for Guyana.
That would be good, eh? Yeah. No, good. Makes a lot of sense.
Martin?
This is the way to really get in action. The gentleman behind you, and then you, Rodney, please.
Yes, Kirk Sukram here again. I was looking at some of the slides and looking at the statistics, and I could see that there's need for more adoption and probably faster adoption, particularly for these open standards that relate to security. And I'm wondering whether or not exploring some sort of incentive program would be beneficial to, move that adoption along at a faster rate. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, the government, in its budget introduced a cybersecurity investment tax allowance.
Measuring as
so
guidance.
Maybe there may be opportunities for the same or similar sort of incentive programs to encourage companies to look at these standards and look at adopting them in terms of their operations.
I see a very inspired man holding the microphone, but he's distracted right now with Tarek. Wrong timing, Tarek. You heard this, right? Because this is part of that observatory that you're developing.
Yes. I think it's also very important if we can, we didn't focus much on it, but the, how do you call it? Monetization of what we're doing one way or the other, because at the end of the day, we would like to make some money as well, you know? And it's nice to focus on standards and all these kind of things. But I mean, all our bananas and sugars industries are gone. So we need to find new ways how to generate money, revenue. So if we can have some programs or projects or whatever that are focusing on development of the internet economy, but with the main objective, how can we generate some revenue, that would be a great idea.
I hear you, money drives or data drives, but one of them does drive the economy. It's not so much the focus of the III, but I can see how it's important. And if you have a lot of trust, it'd be easier to make money, right? In a good way. But,
Dan York has his hand up online.
Hi, Martin, can you hear me?
Opportunities. Sorry, Carol. Oh, Dan. Hey, Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I can see you. I'm looking at you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one action that could certainly help a lot in the region is to explore how to measure more data. To your point, just right now, actually about data, you know, some of the challenges that we have, we as the Internet Society with our Pulse site, but others as well, is not getting enough data from some parts of the area. So to the degree that, for instance, you know, the RIPE folks in Europe have the RIPE Atlas program with probes that can get distributed. To the degree that we can get more of those kind of measurement systems running in the Caribbean and around, helps provide more data to people to be able to make more of these decisions about connectivity and pieces. So I think measurement and figuring out increased measurement is a great piece. And I would also, on your list, I didn't see it on there, you added environmental and sustainability, which is critical, but I think several other people talked about there is this definite tie-in to energy and to power, the creation and the ability. As I think as Deirdre mentioned, there's a lot of focus around AI and bringing in data centers for people to go and do things like AI or support other things like that. But you have to power those somehow. So there is a linkage to the power industry that we have to make a little bit more clear when we think about resilience. Again, as we come toward hurricane season and looking at this particular region and the hurricanes that have already come through, and you look at that, the power infrastructure is critical for the resilience of the internet infrastructure. And so we do have to make some connections there that we maybe haven't made as much in the past. So it's increasingly critical that we kind of bridge that connection as well.
Yes, it's really leveraging data and what we can do with it, with AI, etc. Make that it's up and beyond the DNS Observatory, I would say. It's an opportunity that is probably, I would say, if some of these are short term, this is a mid to longer term thing to build up and to make something useful for you. And again, together you have the access, and the network of sharing needs to be also extended to sharing the right data, right? In a trusted way. We heard a lot about that in manners, we heard a lot about it in kindness. We know that from the CERT community. How can we use those data for the benefit of the region rather than just individually? Very good point. I'm impressed by what we have already. If I look back to the develop of what we had on the keep up of how to prepare for emerging technologies, the point that was brought, the moment we're thinking of providing a tool to Africa or developing a tool with Africa on how can they help governments in preparing for AI, quantum, blockchain, IoT in their policy making. So a kind of handbook, a kind of cookbook type approach to set up and then to further develop within the region. That setup, if that evolves, might be very nice to share or to pick up and do something here with as well. Carol, you're inspired again.
We're fighting. Yeah. Actually, I think you're reading my mind. To make these things operational and a priority, we really need to target government, public service, Parliament, in order to get these things really looked at and taken seriously.
Do you have an opinion about that, Mr. Taylor?
Or also for legislation and policies.
It was not about that. I have a different point altogether, so I don't know. Should I make it now? Okay, so I wanted to add, put a focus on coordination, which is, it's like collaboration, but it's different. So, you know, I think it was Yusef that had a nice chart that showed how all of these different standards related to each other. I thought that was very interesting. So in the region, we have Caribnog, and we have CARPIF. I understand there's very recently a formulation of a group with the CCTLD managers in the region. We have the CIGF, which is in its 20th year, conducting this workshop with GFCE this week. There's the Connected Caribbean. Of course, ARIN and LACNIC have their meetings, their policy meetings in the region. And our participation as from the Caribbean is not the best, right? And of course, the ICANN policy meetings where the communities like the CCNSO and so on, supporting organizations, meet again, our representation is poor. And I'm wondering how we can, even though we have separate and distinct mandates in our respective lanes, how we can coordinate better, because as small islands, we have very limited resources. And what you'll find, for all these organizations I call, you'll find the same names and people. So how can we, recognizing that we all have a separate focus, like Caribnog, for example, if we were talking about building capacity and technical standards, Caribnog is a great place for that. And therefore, how can we map out the different stakeholders in the region? We know what Caribnog is doing, what CTU is doing, what governments need to do, and try to coordinate our activities a little better so that when we have a session like this, then we can do 5 or 6, check out 5 or 6 of those tasks that we have to do, as opposed to trying to convene a separate meeting 3 months from now, because this is time, it's effort, it's money as well to bring in experts. And I think we can get a better bang for the buck if we just leverage existing, even if there's an ICANN meeting or there's a CTU meeting that we can tack on a capacity building workshop or a technical meeting to better coordinate our efforts to maximize our resources. Thanks.
Albert, I was just to respond to that a little bit. Albert Daniels, ICANN, for those online. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Within the ICANN multi-stakeholder community, you have those different groups as well. And what I've found is that the character of the different groups is different. So in ICANN, for example, I have a WhatsApp group for all the GAC representatives, government, and they behave in a certain way, they communicate in a certain way. I also have another WhatsApp group for all of the ALSs, the at-large structures, the end users. They are different completely to the GAC folk. I just mentioned, that I also have a different group for the CCTLD managers of the Caribbean. And then finally, I have a group for all of the ICANN fellows from the Caribbean who are different because they have a deeper understanding of what happens within ICANN. And while I support the idea of trying to coordinate, for me, when I communicate with them, I find I always have to communicate to each group differently and try to mobilize them in different ways. So I don't know, maybe the organization, in theory, you should be able, I don't know, maybe to go to a government representative in the country and hope that everything would filter down. But I think maybe we need to look at nuancing our approach to dealing with the different groups.
Sherman, you have to wait.
If you attend the LACNIC meetings, which are very different from the ARIN meetings, but there's so much technical capacity building taking place within a LACNIC meeting. So many different stakeholders, cybersecurity experts, government representatives as well. And I agree that they're very distinct communities, but it just seems to me that it's all happening, but they're all not well supported. Like, this room should really be full today. We should certainly have had a greater participation from the local technical community, in my view. We're all struggling. For Caribnog, same thing. Caribnog held a meeting very recently in the last one I attended. So, yes, Caribnog held a meeting in LACNIC in Panama. Again, maybe 5-6 people. A meeting in ARIN in Barbados, 5-6 people. The operators from Barbados were non-existent, even though they were talking on topics that were very, very relevant to them. And I'm saying that there's a lot of effort, but the results, I think, are not there. And and I agree, it's different stakeholders, but how can we still collaborate to strengthen each other so that we're not all just expending resources, but not really achieving the results that we want?
We have Sherman and then online, because Sherman is...
I think the online one would be relevant to this particular topic. So Lance, I think you can go ahead. Lance Hines from Guyana. Oh.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Thank you, Lance Hines, for the record, and also 1 Guyanese and 2 part of the local ALS, and also part of LACRALO, which is the Latin American and Caribbean at large organization. Notwithstanding Albert's comments, which I generally agree with, the overriding effort, or the undertone to all of this, is how as many people in the region could participate in the internet ecosystem and to some extent benefit from it, whether it's the engineering part, whether it's the policy part. And we have struggled with this for a long time in terms of attendance, in terms of participation, in terms of the understanding of what it is that we need to do. We are spectacular end users of the internet ecosystem. We can TikTok, we can Facebook, we can do all the social media tools as well as anybody else on the planet. We just don't seem to be able to generate the interest in terms of what's under the hood, what's the policy behind the internet ecosystem, what ensures that it's up every day, 24/7, and anytime that you want it. And I think all of us in this would agree that we have tried to do it. I am at a loss. I'm not sure if it's more marketing. It needs to sound sexier. The only way this is going to work is if all the parties are involved. So whether it's government, whether it's private sector, whether it's civil society, all the sectors need to be involved. And I don't know whether we're not educating enough. It is something that I at this point, we are just not doing to be able to get get traction. The ALSs have been around since 2004, 2005. So it's really been a struggle to get enough people signed up and get them involved. And as I said, I'd be happy to hear some more ideas from other jurisdictions, but it has been a real struggle trying to get that traction that we'd like to see here. Not that we're going to stop, but it's just that we got to find ideas. I don't know whether the attraction of monetization, maybe a pull factor. I'm not sure what it is, but certainly we have to do something in terms of getting a lot more participation than we're doing now. But I gotta confess, I don't have the ideas at the moment. I think there's a discussion tomorrow afternoon about the future of the CIGF, and maybe in that we might be able to run a thread in terms of how we get more participation, because the CGIF would also depend on that as well over the long term. Thanks, Nigel.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks for that, and it's a good observation. Also, indeed, volunteering is not as it was. Volunteers need to live as well, and the mechanisms you see is changing. Support for free events, good purpose events, it's changing. So it is important to be aware of this while we maneuver. I'm aware that this is the end of this session, but Shernan has been so patiently, well, at least been waiting.
I'm not even sure if it's still relevant, but okay. I think it's quite important if we can find a way how we can, when we attend these kind of events, that it's more like that we're going to report what we have been doing, you know, because each time we will start from scratch, we will map everything, and then over a few months we come again and we talk about the same thing. So maybe if we can find a way how to ensure that people are engaged, give them responsibility. Okay, these are the things that we're going to do, and then when we reach the next time, we will report what we have been doing. So else it will remain a kind of a challenge.
Yes, this may come back in the Caribbean IGF discussion further tomorrow. For now, I need to cut this short because time is gone. For sure, excellent ideas, and the report is almost as important as the meeting itself, because a report on this workshop will help us to take this forward. That's why we'll deliver it in draft first to all participants and ask for your feedback before we make it final. And then we try to make it live. The other thing, just a final remark here, is how to coordinate between global and local, basically. That is the thing. You see increasingly mechanisms for that emerging. The fact that Carol is here with us, she is chairing the MAC for the global IGF. And she's here in the local IGF meeting. There's an interest. You want to keep your roots, you want to keep your feet in practice, whereas we also need to talk about things at the global level and bring that knowledge back. So I think we're committed to that. And with that, I really thank you deeply for your active participation. And don't hesitate to approach me if you think we forgot something, either immediately on my email address, martin@GNKS, Global Knowledge Network Knowledge Society .com, or to anyone you know in this room, Albert, Nigel, Shannon. We'll make this work, and we'll get this report, and we'll build upon that. The report is not the end. The report will be the beginning of next steps. So really thank you very much for this opportunity to work with you, and really look forward to whatever more is coming. With that, the next session. Nigel's up.
Yes, I want to say thanks to Martin. Let's give him another special round of applause for coordinating and curating the content we've had today so far. And I think we've gotten some very pertinent sort of recommendations coming out of the day's proceedings. So we have two more items for this session today, more continuing in the vein of capacity building, I would say, and idea generation. The first of which would come from Meta. And Mr. Alex Pompey from Meta is going to talk about data for good. And this is a very quite interesting presentation because it shows how one can use statistics to generate information, useful data. So I would just ask that Alex come on now, and there he is. And Alex, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nigel, for the welcome. Apologies that I'm unable to join you in person. I really wish I was there with you. And I also acknowledge that I'm in the position of standing between you and probably a wonderful evening with wonderful food and drink. So I'll try and keep it upbeat and also leave plenty of time for interaction and questions. I know it's a little bit difficult to ask the questions when we are in this mixed hybrid approach, but we can make use of the technology or connect via email later and get all of your questions answered. So now I'm going to share my screen for my slides. Yeah, and as mentioned, my name is Alex Pompey. I work at Meta, formerly called Facebook. And I work on a program called Data for Good as a research manager. I've been doing this for around 6 years now. I'm a data scientist by background. I was a physicist. And then I worked in humanitarian response around the world, in Ukraine, in Namibia, Washington, D.C., others, before I joined private sector. And I really sit at this intersection of novel big data sets, but how they can be reduced down to something usable for policymakers. And today my talk will focus on using data for crisis response, drawing upon our examples and case studies from the Caribbean region over the last few years. And so I'm hopeful that these stories are uplifting and can help make us more resilient as climate change increases the severity and the unpredictability of these weather events that are so pertinent for the region. So to dive in, the Data for Good program at Meta is a data sharing program. So we are about taking different data that we have as a result of the users on our platforms, packaging it into privacy-preserving packages that can be shared externally for social impact. So all of these data sets are free. It is meant to, we try and make data available so that people can use it to save lives. So we want to acknowledge that space, the responders, the people on the ground who are at risk, they are the ones creating the impact. They are the ones putting themselves at risk. We are in a very enviable space on the data side of just making sure that the privacy is okay. They are the real heroes in all of this. And what we want to do is help them make better decisions, typically, when it comes to crisis response. The portfolio of the entire program you can see here. Today, we are going to focus on the crisis response data sets that you see in the third row, and a few of the AI-powered data sets, which are kind of helpful baselines to use. This menu of data sets, you can see all of those on the top half are available fully publicly, and there will be QR codes on each of my slides where you can scan with your phone, or I'm sure we'll be able to share this presentation later so that you can link and download them. They are all available on the UN OCHA Humanitarian Data Exchange. Again, like I said, for free. You can either go in your browser and download them, or you can also use their API. Some of the data sets on the bottom half, these ones are not available fully publicly. They are controlled access to vetted nonprofit organizations, humanitarian organizations, UN agencies, and academic research institutions, available for non-commercial purposes with use limitations defined by a data license agreement. It's only 2 pages long. That's kind of a miracle to get data from Meta with only a 2-page click-through. But that's more boring. Let's talk about the more fun data. and let's talk about the lived experiences in your region and explain the different data sets shown here, how they are created, how statistics are important for making data turn into something that is insightful and actionable and can be used to save lives. So we're going to reduce down that big menu just to these data sets, which are pertinent for crisis response. And instead of showing you the name of the data set, I'm now showing you the question that the data set is designed to answer. There are other use cases that the data is useful for, but we designed them to specifically answer these questions. So these publicly available data sets on the top are designed to answer where are people living. These are population density estimates at 30-meter resolution with demographic disaggregations. Where is poverty and wealth distributed? This is at 2.5-kilometer resolution. These are AI generated as well. And they're available for low and middle income countries across the globe. And then lastly, these data sets, how much do people typically leave home? So during the COVID-19 pandemic, this was one of the main questions policymakers and public health officials had, especially in the early days before we knew much about the virus. Maybe stay-at-home orders were one of the only non-pharmaceutical interventions that could be recommended in order to stop the spread of an infectious disease. So quantifying the degree to which people seem to be staying near their home is a very important metric for these policymakers to determine where they are at in their fight against COVID. But of course, it's also very pertinent in the crisis response space because evacuation orders or in the lead up to a crisis, if evacuation recommendations have been issued, the extent to which the population is or is not adhering to those is probably a very valuable data point. Then this bottom row, as soon as the crisis happens, and to define that, you might be aware of on Facebook when there is a crisis near you, you will be given this option to check in. And if you want to check in safe, like, oh, I want to mark myself safe during this crisis. This is called the safety check feature. The same time that is happening and going out to all of the users in the affected area the area affected by the crisis, on the back end, we are generating these data sets and sharing them to those nonprofit organizations and humanitarian organizations I mentioned, and they answer questions about dynamic changes in population density. These are updated every 8 hours at 2.5-kilometer resolution. How much do we see more or less Facebook users in that area than we normally would? Similarly, population mobility. Are we seeing more people move from region A to region B compared to before the crisis? Of course, as was mentioned in the previous discussion, the resilience of power networks and telecommunications networks is absolutely critical for the region. And so we give our estimates. Here we are seeing Facebook users with this level of network connectivity, and we can compare that to pre-crisis levels. It seems in this 2.5-kilometer square, normally we would expect to see Facebook users, but we are not seeing them now during this crisis. So perhaps that is an indication of a network outage. And then lastly, we can look at the rate at which business pages on Facebook, as there's a large amount of digital commerce that takes place. Many businesses are present on the Facebook platform. The rate at which they are posting to Facebook, perhaps indicating that they are open or closed related to a crisis, can be aggregated up, and we can produce measures of economic activity compared to before the crisis and watch the rate of recovery for around 10 different economic sectors. So these are all available through the Data for Good program. These are just very brief overviews of what these data sets consist of. And now I will show you how they were used in crisis events over the last few years in your region. So we have some very recent examples. Unfortunately, Hurricane Beryl, a very powerful storm that arrived very, very early compared to historical precedent. You can scan the QR code here for the full situational report, but starting with our Facebook population during crisis data set, We are looking here at a visualization that looks at of the Facebook users on their mobile phone with GPS enabled. They have opted in to sharing GPS with Facebook. Are we seeing more of them or less of them in a 2.5 kilometer tile resolution than before the crisis? And so this is very indicative when we look at Grenada, St. Vincent and Grenadines here, which areas have this dramatic drop over 2.5 standard deviations compared to a normal day and the 90 days before the crisis. We are seeing 2.5 standard deviations less users in that area than normal. This is typically a sign that these are the most affected areas by the crisis. And then we can look at the places where there is often a reciprocal increase, especially on island nations. Different people will move to safer locations. They're still at risk. I'm not saying safer. And there might be a surge of activity in those areas with more users than normal. And they might be more active than normal because we have found during crisis times that social media usage actually goes up quite a bit because people are wanting to connect with their friends and family, let them know that they are okay, or ask if others are okay or if they are in need of things. So we can see these surges of activity and spikes, negative spikes, and this can be useful for resource allocations. So in this case, the analysis and visualizations, and then also the resource allocations are informed by a network called Crisis Ready, which is led by Harvard University and the nonprofit humanitarian organization Direct Relief. So the chain of data flowing here, we are producing at Meta these kind of aggregate statistics at a high spatial and temporal resolution. It is then shared to the vetted humanitarian organizations who have long-standing history of working on crisis response. These new data sets and new data that they triangulate with more traditional data sets, data from other private sector partners, and they produce typically situation reports which then inform the operational response for the crisis. And so we want to emphasize that we are not trying to reinvent a workflow here. We're trying to empower those crisis response humanitarian actors who are doing the strong work. We can also look at this data as a time series. Here now we are taking all of the tiles in the individual countries affected by the storm, and we are looking at what was the median change in those standard deviations. So a higher number indicates that this is a more than expected number of Facebook users on the platform. And we are averaging across the entire country, all the tiles. This is useful to see that spike, which I mentioned. In the lead up to landfall, there is an increase across almost all of the countries, and when we average across all of the tiles, that people are using social media more. They are looking for information. This can inform how public emergency personnel might issue warning or information. This shows that social media is often turned to quite a bit in the lead up to the crisis. But then when the crisis hits, we can see which countries are affected by which degree compared to baseline, and the rate at which they sort of approach and return back to normal day over day. Again, from that same group I mentioned, this QR code would take you to the same situational report. Moving back a few years, we are looking now at the Haiti earthquake in 2021, another devastating catastrophe. And in this instance, we are using our pre-crisis, our baseline population density estimates. This is called the High Resolution Settlement Layer. It is available fully publicly for the entire globe. What we have done to create this data set is that we take the estimates from census data of population stock. And we get this from the Columbia University's CIGF group. They are the world's experts in predicting, there has not been a census in 5 years in this country, but if there was a census, what would the results be? And instead of distributing these population counts just across a census block, we distribute those population estimates only in the 30 meter by 30 meter tiles on the Earth's surface, where a machine vision algorithm that we have trained looked at satellite imagery and said, yes, I think there is a building present there. So we are taking advantage of this uniquely human phenomenon that we tend to live in structures, and those structures are visible in satellite imagery typically if there are no clouds. And so we have generated these population density estimates with the demographic breakouts that come from the census. They are just estimates. There is no Facebook user data involved here. We are just taking advantage of our computational power and geospatial data expertise to generate them. And what they are useful for in the case of Haiti, as you can see here, is Pacific Disaster Center is able to make very, very accurate estimates of the population exposed to a given crisis. In this case, breaking it down, the total population that is exposed, and then the different demographics that would be affected by an earthquake in that region. Once the crisis hits, like I mentioned, the safety check goes live, and then in the background, we are generating these dynamic data sets, one of which is the network connectivity estimate. So here you are seeing immediately following the Haiti earthquake, what is the estimate of connectivity that we are seeing across the Facebook user network? Those shown in green is where, yes, we are seeing connectivity on this day, and that is what we would expect. On this day of the week, in the 90 days before the crisis, on, let's say, a Thursday like today, we see Facebook users in that place, typically. So green is like, this seems like it's normal. Red is where, normally on a Thursday, we would be seeing Facebook usage coming from this area, but today we are not. And so we would estimate perhaps that something is amiss there. Those might be places to look for outages. The gray areas are where we are saying, no, we are not seeing Facebook users here, but that is normal for a Thursday in the 90 days before the crisis. So these are places where it is normal that, or typical, that there is not activity there. So maybe that is not a place to direct resources, et cetera. And this one is perhaps one of the most complex. The Facebook movement during crisis is not looking at these tiles like, are there more or less Facebook users than normal? Now we are looking at a vector, a start and an end. How many people moved from the start to the end? Moved from region A to region B? Maybe it is like a commute. How many people moved from the suburbs into the city on this 8-hour time window? And is that more or less Facebook users than we typically see making that transition? And so it gets very complex. This is the statistical comparisons like, it is less people than normal, so that's a negative value. But maybe the reverse, how many people moved from the city to the suburbs was an increase. So a very complex matrix of data sets, but it can be used to really pinpoint maybe this road is closed and people are moving to this road instead to move from point A to point B. Again, you can scan the QR codes here to go in more depth. This is meant to be a quick fly-through whirlwind tour, maybe is the right word. Here we can see the data sets used in response to a volcanic explosion. I'm trying to give a diversity of crisis types. So what we see on the dots, each of these dots, is the location of shelters that have been put up to respond to the crisis. And in the immediate area around those shelters, we can aggregate the Facebook population during crisis data set to understand, are there more or less people in the area that this shelter is serving? In this case, a radius of 1 kilometer around, and we can color those dots by that. So red would indicate that there are fewer Facebook users there than normal. Yellow would mean more. So maybe those are the shelters where there is a larger than expected number of people going. We might want to send more beds, more medical supplies to that area. And then what we can also do is zonally statistic measure how many children we estimate to be under the age of 5 with our baseline population density from the high resolution settlement layer. And this is useful. Children under the age of 5 might have different medical needs, might have different needs in the shelter than a different population, or it has been often useful for planning vaccine delivery, where it might be children under the age of 5 who are the intended recipients of the intervention. So we're able to layer different data sets on as we become more sophisticated, and combine that with other data from the government around the location of shelters to become more targeted and give those operators on the ground a better chance of saving lives. And then this is the final one. I think this is more a little bit forward-looking, even though it comes from a crisis, but I'm using it to demonstrate the point. For hurricanes, which are probably the most pertinent storm or crisis type for your region, the understanding which areas might have the most vulnerable people is one of the main questions we hear from the humanitarian world. We know that a lot of people who are using Facebook, for example, they might be some of the least vulnerable people in a given area. So seeing these data sets of Facebook users might be missing those people that are really the ones that we are trying to help with our humanitarian response. And so our relative wealth index, this is our AI-generated estimates of poverty and wealth distribution at 2.5 kilometer resolution. Again, we're not like looking at dynamic Facebook user data here to generate those. So they are not, this is a baseline data set. It is not being updated in the time of the crisis. But if we look at that baseline, where might those poorer neighborhood sections be within a large metro area, or in the case of Dorian, as it approached Florida, a very diverse and constantly changing dynamic environment? Finding those that are most socioeconomically vulnerable, those regions, those might have different types of interventions than some of the wealthier areas. So just in a quick summary, most of the data sets I've described for you are all derived from the Facebook users who have opted in to share their GPS data with the company. And those human mobility that comes from the GPS data that is aggregated up, we aggregate it over different spatial and temporal resolutions to be useful for different interventions. Some of them are for economic development, like commuting zones. Some are for the crisis response, which I've talked to you about today. And others, like co-location and activity space and international travel patterns, were designed to be useful for pandemic response. So there you have a wide range of things to choose from with different resolutions and different access levels, and also different user samples. So we try and build out not one size fits all data sets, but more targeted data sets that are designed for specific types of interventions to, again, take the burden off of the humanitarians who are trying to make quick decisions with limited time. The data wrangling and analyses should not be their primary challenge. That should be the work on the ground. So if this has interested you and you'd like to learn some more, the Data for Good program has quite a few other resources, including tutorials and also a strong community over Slack. You can scan the QR code here if you'd like to see tutorials on how we built some of these different analyses and visualizations. It can start all the way from GIS beginners with spreadsheet level expertise, all the way up to very strong pros who are building their own custom geospatial analysis pipelines in Python or R. We try and provide a starting point for everyone. And with that, I'll just say thank you again for your attention and my apologies for not being there in person. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take the remaining time. And maybe I'll leave on the screen here just that original menu of all the data sets in the program in case you are to help you direct your questions, perhaps. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex, for that information. I see a hand raised in the room here, so let's not let you go quite yet. Albert?
Albert Daniels, speaking on my own personal behalf. You mentioned that the models are built using data from Facebook users who have opted in to share their GPS information. Facebook owns some other platforms, and I was thinking it might be interesting, given the difference in demographic between, for example, Facebook users and Instagram users, that it might be interesting to look at, how persons are moving around on one hand. Also, it may be interesting to look at the amount of messaging, for example, in WhatsApp that may be taking place at the different times before a disaster, during and after. So I was wondering if you've been doing any work in that area using data from the other platforms?
Yeah, these are both great ideas and ones that I personally share the same enthusiasm, especially to provide the comparison. So the main limitation and the main question we ask is getting back to this, to try and find the most vulnerable. Is WhatsApp present in any of these data sets? The answer, unfortunately, is no WhatsApp. In this case, the WhatsApp platform, the GPS data, when you share that, it is like your message. It is encrypted, so there's no way for us to see it or decode it, even on the Meta side. That is just between you and the recipient if you choose to share your location. And as a product, it doesn't have as many experiences that are derived from location. So I think it will be hard to draw any, but I completely agree with you. Again, setting aside, not talking about message contents, we are blind to that. It is an encrypted, end-to-end encrypted medium. But just the rate at which these messages are being sent, even at a country level, I think might be very interesting to look at. I know that we have heard anecdotally from humanitarian organizations that they typically rely on a WhatsApp when they're on the ground a lot. So we might also even be able to see effects that quantify the rate at which the humanitarian response is being mobilized. And I'm very eager to try that out, but we have not yet done so. So thank you for sharing my enthusiasm for these future endeavors.
Thank you very much, Alex. I know that we had another question on the floor, but we are behind time a bit. So what we'll do is we'll send it to you in the chat, and you can probably respond there.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, so we are on to our last speaker for today, and she's been here participating, waiting patiently for her opportunity. And let me see if I can say this. Miss Maria de Gutierrez Ortiz Monasterio from the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. And this, like, should I say, the presentation before looked at, I would say, beneficial use of the internet. This one is certainly looking at misuse of the internet and what are some of the, I guess, policy measures being taken and some of the international coordination type efforts as well. So let me pass over to Maria, whom we call Luli, to tell us about child sexual abuse material online and the UN's draft convention, newly minted UN draft convention on cybercrime. So, Luli.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nigel. And thank you also so much for the CTU for the invitation and all the coordination. This is a very important forum to talk about. As United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, I'm the Regional Project Coordinator for Central America and the Caribbean of the Global Program on Cybercrime. And we cover, I'm based in Panama, and in Panama, excellent, thank you. We cover 22 countries from Central America and the Caribbean. For the presentation, I will try to make it so short. I'm the last one of this activity today, but just to explain to you that UNODC is the specialized office of United Nations system, obviously drugs and crime focus, and we provide technical assistance service to the governments and NGOs and other stakeholders and implementation of the different conventions that we protect. We have the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime with the protocols of trafficking in persons, smuggling of migrants, arms, also the convention about the corruption. And I will talk about a little bit about the new next convention. I hope so we sign it for the countries of the next months. So we provide also, okay, let me move. Okay, you got it. I didn't see it. Perfect. So we provide this technical assistance and training to the members' countries to prevent and combat cybercrime. We have experts in Central America, in Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico, and also in South America, in Africa and Kazakhstan, in Qatar, in Thailand, in Philippines, and Malaysia. Our experts are digital forensic experts, legal experts, cybersecurity experts, cybercrime prevention experts, cybercrime prosecutors, and cybercrime investigators. As you see, it's multiple experts because we cover a lot of things. About the global program's contents, it's capacity building, mentoring, legal framework, cooperation. As you say, the cooperation is very important, and the prevention. And our beneficiaries are police, prosecutor, judiciary, forensic, ministries of education, regulars of communications, as you are, the CSIRTs, the cyber emergency response teams, the NGOs, and the private sector. And as you can see in the presentation, our areas of intervention is cyber investigation, digital evidence, digital forensic, online child sexual exploitation and abuse, virtual innocence, and the prevention. And also, as you know, the work with the cyber defense crimes and the cyber-enabled crimes. Because with internet, we have a new crimes, as you see, like assistant material, child sexual abuse and exploitation material, malware, hacking, and DDoS that we listened about today a lot, but also other cyber attacks with crimes that it's make in physical, like trafficking in person, money laundering, drugs trafficking, arms, opioids. It happens without internet, but they are using the internet to be connected and be more effective them and more damage. So our approach to combat the cybercrime in a holistic way. As I told you, they asked me to talk a little bit. This is a draft of UN Nation Convention against cybercrime. Just this working group, this community to elaborate this new convention. It took like 3 years working to negotiate all the words in this document, and the agreement, I think so, it was in August, I put it. In August, they start to finish the document, and this document, this draft, is going to be presented to General Assembly of UN on December. So the General Assembly will decide if they approve. So if they approve, it's going to pass to the countries to be signing. This is going to be the first convention after 20 years. The last convention was the convention of Palermo, of trafficking in person and organized crime. So it is very new one, and it's going to make the new policies about the cybercrime and how to protect the cyberspace. So the topics, I will put it just the little topics, but it's a huge document about, it's going to talk this new convention, or the draft contains these topics about talking about the illegal access, illegal interception, interference with electronic data, interference with information and communication technology system, misuse of the device, a password, access credential, electronic signatures, but also we have information about the communication technology system relating on forgery, input alteration, delegation or suppress of electronic data. Obviously talk about the offenses related of online child sexual exploitation and abuse material, producing, offering, selling, distributing, transmitting, publishing, possession, of course, and soliciting and procuring this kind of material, of seasoned material. But also talking about the grooming, and also the non-consensual dissemination of intimate image. As you know, a lot of crimes include when you take a pictures naked and send them to your husband, but maybe the next year you're divorced and your husband make a face account and publish your videos or your photos without your consent. It's a very, very huge criminal act, and very important to block, not they do it again. So the liability of the legal person, but also the prosecution, the adjudication, I will say in Spanish, and sanction, it's a difficult word in English, the jurisdiction, the procedure measures for the collection of evidence, the preservation of the stored electronic data, the protection of the witness, the international cooperation, the protection of the data. So also we are going to talk about, I will put it in the presentation, all the topics, but it is more. And one thing that is important to talk about, please don't say again child pornography. I understand it is in your criminal codes or legal framework, but actually, as you know, the children cannot make pornography. We need to talk in a different way, because if I'm adult, I can make a pornography because I made my consent. But the children cannot consent, make pornography. So we talk about CSAM, is child sexual abuse material. And about the CSAM status, the statistic, maybe just to explain, we have different platforms that we have the reports of them of when you are sharing CSAM material. If you are based, or the companies of the platforms are based in USA, they have a specific legislation that need to provide the information to these NGOs. Is National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, is better well known like NECMEC. So they make this kind of reports. And the last report that they have in 2023, the cyber team Pipeline received 36 million of reports of suspect child sexual exploitation. It's a lot of information, a lot of reports to be investigated by the countries, but I made the comparison of the statistic in the Caribbean. I included also the information of the last year. And at the beginning, as you can see, in 2021 and 2022, it was increasing the statistic of the numbers of reports of possible CSAM material between your countries. But also I saw in the 2023 of last year, and some decrease. And I asked for NECMEC and ICMEC, what is the decrease? Why? And they say me, sometimes they start to use another platforms, not only Facebook, not only TikTok based in USA, they start to using another platforms to share this kind of material. So it is very important to be coordinated. And also, as you can see, Guyana have in the 2021, 3,000, and the 22, 4,000, and also in 23, 4,000. And for the Trinidad and Tobago, for example, on 2021, 4,000, 22, 9,000, and 23, 6,000. But also, if you put together all the numbers, yes.
Yes, just a question. These would be, just for clarity, children within these jurisdictions, or just that the material is being circulated or stored or shared within?
The IP address of the material who are receiving this material is based in that country. So the pedophiles are there. Possible with this are connected with the same pedophile looking for different children's. So possible of 9,000, one pedophile is 100 reports with them or more. So also other platforms are used by the pedophiles, like peer-to-peer networks. In this context, we have the report of ICA Cops. Maybe you don't know about ICA Cops, but also CPS, Child Protection System. It provides us a specific IP address and connection of these pedophiles, but also you can see, well, the police can see in direct of the platforms the download material by the pedophiles. So yes, of course.
Quick question. Given the high amounts of use of VPNs, especially in the Caribbean and virtual servers, how do you verify origins of content that are truly Caribbean? Because in my experience, I've seen incidents happen in the Caribbean, but the actors are not necessarily citizens of any one of our Caribbean countries. Yeah? So just, that's the question. What level of verification process is done before you determine if it's just only by IP?
Yes, actually they are using VPNs sometimes, but not all the time. Not all the pedophiles use VPNs because they know that they are not catch and for a long, long time, so they don't use this kind of platforms. And actually, each of the reports needs to be investigated to ask for the internet service provider, the ISPs, to check the location and the user, and depends of the case. Each case must to be investigated. I don't know how many is going to be using, but it's not all of them using VPN. And also, as I told you, well, they are using peer-to-peer networks, but also we have the different reports. As ICSE with Interpol is a database of material, of citizen material. So working together, the Interpol, to identify these kind of cases, because sometimes in the dark web or deep web, they are sharing this material and they try to hide the location, as you say, like a VPN. And as you know, the darknet using like 7 different VPN. But also inside of the darknet, we have police, investigated, and uncover agents, cyber uncover agents. So when the countries have the facility and the legal authorization for do that, they can do it. We receive this kind of reports by Interpol. Yes, we have it. And provide the information for the investigation by the countries. But also, the Interpol have another network, is IWOL, is the world's page, perfect, is ICSE. And also they have, as you can see, it is almost 4 million of videos and images of citizen material to identify the possible victims, working together, because sometimes only you receive the video, but you don't know who is the victim, where she is. But also with the other police, they can identify maybe the sound of the voice of the children and identify, oh yes, she's from possible Argentina. And you can go to the police of Argentina to try to look her. The IWOL of Interpol is the worst list that they are using, the pedophile using these platforms. So in these cases, with a coordination with the internet service provider, you can block this Emule or other platforms that they are using by the pedophiles to share this kind of material. In this case, as you can see, they have a special group of police to identify that there is a real children, yes, and age of the children, and also the abuse. And some of the abuse are more increasing of severe severe abuse. Yes, of course.
Hey, yeah, so just adding to what the gentleman was asking, locally here in Guyana, we have laws that if you commit any kind of cyber crime, they can go and reverse engineer and track you down back to your ISP and eventually find the user. Even though the user may be using VPNs, we can track them back to the ISP here in Guyana.
Exactly. When I receive information that they are using VPNs, maybe they think that you are not going to be tracked, but every click that you made, you have a trace. It's a traceability. So only is make a little bit more work for the police to investigation, because you need to go to this VPN platform for us the information, because they have it. Yes.
So like my colleague here in Guyana mentioned, that we are enforcing that law or that system in place. For the Interpol, how much percentage is that enforced?
Percentage of what? Sorry, I don't know. Listen.
The enforcement of that act or law in terms of cybersecurity. So as my colleague mentioned, here in Guyana, we are putting up that we could do reverse engineering and pick that person up, or that area or that company. In terms of that Interpol and data, how much is it enforced that you could find that person or that location?
I know. Well, I don't have a specific number, but it is a big challenge for the countries, and for me, it's very painful, because you know that that is a victim and continues being a victim until they identify and recovery and rescue. So it is very important for the countries to participate in this task force for identification. Actually, Trinidad and Tobago, I support the participation of Trinidad and Tobago, and they are going again for the other meeting of identification of victims, but it's a lot of work, believe me. So, continues with the presentation. So the countries can block or order to internet service provider to block this kind of platforms using for this activity of sharing CSAN material. Just one example of how they do it, the Interpol, and in coordination with the countries. And you can see in Africa, 6 minors rescued from exploitation. So maybe we think that we close the door safely every night, but we have open internet during the night also in our homes. So the risk is always with us, because we have a cell phone with us connected to internet all the time. And the house also is connected all the time. It's important to regulate and be coordinated. So about these different types of cybercrimes with the children, like grooming, sexting, sextortion, I will not go deeper about that, but it is increasing these crimes against the children, but also in live streaming. And a lot of times is the family, the parent, the mother or the father selling the babies, the pictures of the babies or the videos of abuse of the babies because they wanted to get money. Remember, always follow the money because they wanted to get money, and also be connected with other countries, other users, other pedophiles, and they start to receive money by Western Union or maybe by cryptocurrency of other types to send money. So it is very important to protect our children. And also, just for a statistic, the majority of the victims are started with zero, with the babies. They have been abused, but also the majority of the victims are like 11 and 30 years, but also 18, 17. And the majority of the victims are females, unfortunately. We need to take care of our girls. And the international cooperation is very important. The challenge that we are going to face with the artificial intelligence and try to make user the IE. And just for announcement, actually in this year we make a regional meeting of communication regulators in Trinidad and Tobago about CISAN acts, but we are going to work with the CTU for the deliver a regional training on ransomware to support the CTU. We are going to arrange the dates with the CTU, and the countries will receive the invitation by UNODC. Some of the policy actions that I take a little bit about in the convention are the establish channels of communication between the authorities, agencies, and services, provide data for investigation purpose, also special cooperation on criminal investigation, prosecution, and judicial procedures, but also the expedition preservation of the data, traffic and content, and subscriber information. It's very important for the investigation of the police on these kind of crimes to get the information as soon as possible of the IP address, the routers, the users, because we receive the reports and we can see the IP address, we can see some nicknames, some numbers of these pedophiles, but if the service provider block it and doesn't want to provide to the police, it's more difficult to police investigation. It's not impossible because we have open source investigation, but also database of the governments. But it will be more easy for the police. This is specific investigation, and also when they talk about the human rights of the data protection, I say with the criminal acts, we need to have access for this information because I don't think the internet service providers wants to protect the pedophiles. I think so they want to protect the children's. And if my children's being abused, really, I want to know, and I want they can give the information to the police on time. So we have collaboration, as you see, with Interpol, YOM, UNICEF, Meta, Google, and if you want to have more information or be in contact with me, this is my cell phone and my email, and anything I will be for you.
Thank you very much, Maria. There was one thing I saw online here. How does the internet social media platform? Yeah. Just below that. How do they, right. Okay. How do they know children's genders? How do the internet social media platform know children's genders? Because children sign up of different ages to gain access. So do you know anything about safeguards then that social media companies use for this type of thing?
Actually, it depends of the companies. I want to be honest, it depends of the protection of the information of the companies who, when they create the users and how they connect it as, I don't know, ID, identification, because as you know, a lot of children under the permission of use Facebook, they have account of Facebook and try to look like bigger. So it's part of the regulation that the government's going to be progress with the new convention to protect the children and make the policies for the other platforms providers of the internet or users of internet. It depends. It is not easy, but we need to work on that. Have another question?
One short question, because we are indeed well over time. Go ahead, I agree.
Right. Going back to the table where you show the different CARICOM countries and the numbers, how often is this report compiled and by whom?
It's every year and is made by the NGOs who receive all this information. All the collective data is made by for them. And also Facebook, well, Meta, all the platforms provide this information. Actually, I put the link if you want to see all the because, and the number as I put it, like 36 millions of reports, you can see of which of platforms, Telegram, TikTok, who have base in USA, you can see directly how it increased and decreased and the reports of each of the companies.
Well, let's give our thanks to Maria. Well, you have endured. But I think we've had some really good information today. So we'll bring to a close this particular session of it, and I'll hand back to our host, Jennifer, to take us through. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. A round of applause once again for our moderator and also our panelists as well. A fruitful discussion indeed. Just as we conclude, it's clear that an increase in justified trust in our internet infrastructure requires continuous collaboration, knowledge sharing, and of course, a key word here, proactive action. Ladies and gentlemen, the folks at CTU has something special planned for you this afternoon. You could join us at the Fusion Restaurant. Right now, we have a reception prepared to you, so we hope that we could network, have light conversations, and also enjoy the evening. For those who are joining us online, and if you are in Guyana and you're registered with the program, you are free to join us as well this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, a good evening and do enjoy. Oh, and you could exit the door to my right, down the hall, you'll see the Fusion Restaurant entrance. Thank you once again.
Recording stopped.